Hey guys, tonight we step into a place that hums with both history and unease. A building that has sheltered artists, dreamers, and wanderers for more than a century, the Hotel Chelsea in New York City. Its towering brick walls rise against the restless Manhattan sky, windows glowing faintly like tired eyes watching over the streets below. In its halls, you can almost feel the pulse of the city, creative, chaotic, and at times tragically haunted. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins on a rain-slick night in late autumn. Nora, a writer trying to escape the crushing weight of her unfinished manuscript, arrived at the Chelsea with 2 worn suitcases and a head full of restless thoughts. The cab dropped her at the curb, where puddles reflected the neon glow of a bar sign across the street. She hesitated, tilting her head back to take in the building's facade, ornate iron balconies, rows of windows stacked like watchful sentinels, and a heavy wooden door beneath a small awning that dripped with rain. The doorman gave her a nod, though his expression seemed distracted, almost wary, as if the hotel's threshold was not merely an entrance, but a point of no return. Inside, the lobby was dim, and spacious walls adorned with paintings that felt more alive than still. A faint scent of varnish and cigarette smoke clung to the air. The floor tiles gleamed with a wet sheen from guests shaking off the rain. Nora approached the front desk, where an elderly clerk, his suit fraying at the cuffs, checked her reservation. He slid a heavy brass key across the counter, its tag stamped with the number 213. "You'll find it halfway down the second floor," he murmured, his voice low. "The lift isn't reliable tonight. Take the stairs." His gaze lingered a moment too long, as though weighing whether to tell her something more. But he only adjusted his spectacles and returned to his ledger. The stairwell was narrow, and winding, its iron railing cold beneath her hand. She could hear her own footsteps echo, though faintly behind them came another rhythm, as though someone followed a step behind, pausing whenever she did. She glanced back. No one was there. Only the dim bulb overhead buzzing faintly, its light casting jagged shadows against the wall. Room 213 greeted her with a heavy door, its brass knob polished smooth by decades of touch. Inside, the space was oddly generous, high-ceilinged with tall windows that faced the street. The wallpaper peeled in places, revealing older layers beneath. A writing desk sat beneath the window, a lamp casting a golden pool of light across the scarred surface. She dropped her bags, exhaling a long breath. The city beyond the glass seemed muted, as though the room itself existed at a remove from the noise below. It was quiet here, too quiet for a building in the middle of Manhattan. As Nora unpacked, she noticed small details, the faint scrape marks on the floor near the bed, as though it had been moved repeatedly. The mirror above the dresser, slightly tilted to one side, a thin crack tracing down the plaster near the corner. Each imperfection carried a history she could not yet name. Later, she sat at the desk, notebook, open pen, poised. For the first time in weeks, the words began to flow, halting at first, then steadily gathering. The silence of the room seemed to press against her, urging her to continue. The lamp flickered, but she barely noticed, immersed in the rhythm of her own hand scrawling across the page. It wasn't until she set her pen down that she realized she was no longer alone. In the mirror above the dresser, half in shadow, a figure lingered. Not behind her, not in the room, only within the glass itself. A tall man, shoulders stooped, his face obscured in blur, as though water ran across the reflection. Her breath caught. She turned sharply, heart hammering. The room was empty. The mirror showed nothing but the faint outline of her desk lamp. Nora told herself it was exhaustion, her imagination twisting in the dim light. She pushed away from the desk and settled onto the bed, trying to steady her pulse. The rain outside had slowed, replaced by the distant hum of traffic. But as her eyes closed, she thought she heard a voice low and muffled slipping from the walls. A voice that did not sound like her own thoughts at all. It whispered only once, just enough to seep beneath her skin. "Welcome back." The words echoed long after they should have faded. Welcome back. Not welcome. Not hello. Not even some passing trick of her imagination. No, it was precise. Weighted. As though someone who knew her had spoken directly into her ear. Nora sat upright in the bed, her breath shallow, her skin prickling with the kind of unease that made every sound in the room sharper. The radiator hissed. The floorboards groaned faintly, adjusting to the shift in weather. Outside, a car horn wailed and then cut off abruptly. She tried to steady herself with reason. Old buildings groaned, she told herself. They carried the weight of time, the memory of countless people passing through. And the Chelsea wasn't just any building. It was a place steeped in decades of restless energy. Writers, musicians, painters, all of them bringing their obsessions, their addictions, their madness through these halls. Maybe the hotel still carried their residue like fingerprints that never quite washed away, but it hadn't felt like residue. It had felt intentional. Nora rose and crossed the room. The mirror tilted slightly above the dresser caught her eye again. She reached up to straighten it, but her fingers froze on the frame. The glass was faintly smudged, though she hadn't touched it yet. Marks like handprints trailed faintly across the surface, blurred as though pressed from the inside. She yanked her hand away and stumbled back. The mirror wavered for the briefest second, not in the way glass reflects a shifting light, but as though it had breath. Her heartbeat drummed against her ribs. She forced herself to look away, pulling the desk chair in front of the mirror like a barrier. Then she collapsed onto the bed once more, too exhausted to think. Sleep, however, did not bring peace. Her dreams were jagged, fractured images, endless hallways lined with red doors. A woman's voice singing softly, though the words were slurred, indistinct, like a recording dragged through water. A corridor that stretched longer the more she walked, walls leaning inward, suffocating until a shadow moved just at the edge of sight. When she woke, the lamp was still on. Her notebook lay open, though she didn't remember leaving it there. Across the page, her handwriting sprawled in uneven lines she hadn't written. The stairwell breathes when no one climbs it. The doors remember who stayed. Do not look into the mirror too long. The pen rested neatly in the spine as though set there carefully. Nora's stomach turned. She reached for the notebook, but before she could touch it, the radiator let out a piercing hiss. A thin coil of steam escaped from the pipe near the wall, curling like smoke. In that faint cloud for a heartbeat, she swore she saw the outline of a face staring back at her features, stretched and indistinct. Then it was gone. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Nora tried to distract herself with the city outside, wandering the rainy streets of Chelsea, sitting in cafes where the chatter of strangers felt grounding. Yet even as she walked among the living, the thought gnawed at her. Someone or something had written in her notebook. The words had been too deliberate, too precise to dismiss. By the time she returned to the hotel, evening had settled. The building loomed against the darkening sky, its ornate balconies like blackened ribs pressing outward. The lobby was quieter than before. The clerk gave her a brief glance, then dropped his eyes as though he didn't want to acknowledge her presence at all. As she climbed the stairwell, she thought she heard it again, the faint echo of another set of footsteps, perfectly matched to her own. At the second-floor landing, she froze. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, half lit by the dim bulbs overhead. A woman tall and thin, her dress pale, and flowing her hair draped across her shoulders. She did not move. She only stood there, head tilted as though watching. Nora's voice caught in her throat. But then as she blinked, the hallway stretched empty. No woman, no movement. just the faint flicker of one weak bulb buzzing like an insect trapped in glass. She fumbled for her key, opened the door to 213, and locked it quickly behind her. The room was cold, though the radiator hissed. On the dresser, the mirror had shifted again, tilted slightly in the opposite direction, though she had blocked it with the chair. Her notebook lay open on the desk once more. New words scrawled across the page. Welcome back. The letters curved and bled, the ink still wet. Nora stood frozen in the center of the room, her breath trembling as she stared at the fresh ink bleeding into the paper. Welcome back. The words seemed to shimmer faintly under the lamplight, as though they carried their own pulse. She reached out her hand, hovering above the notebook, but she didn't dare touch it. The scent of ink was sharp, recent, too recent. Her throat tightened. "Who's there?" she whispered. Though the sound barely reached her own ears, silence answered. The radiator hissed a car past in the street below, and the hum of the old bulb filled the air. Yet beneath those ordinary noises was something deeper, quieter, like the vibration of a string pulled taut. A silence that wasn't empty, but watchful. She closed the notebook carefully, sliding it back into her suitcase, as if sealing it away might contain whatever force had touched it. But her eyes kept straying to the mirror. The chair she'd pressed against it hadn't kept it still. It had moved anyway. That meant someone or something had entered the room without unlocking the door, or worse, had never needed the door at all. By midnight, sleep was impossible. Nora lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, where faint water stains bloomed like shapes that shifted the longer she watched them. She thought she saw faces forming in the plaster, but every blink erased them again. Then came the sound. At first, a soft tapping like fingernails against wood. She sat up, straining her ears. The noise came from the hallway, slow, deliberate. Tap, 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 not random. A rhythm like someone dragging their fingers along each door as they passed. The sound stopped outside her own room. Her heart hammered. She slid quietly out of bed and approached the door. The faintest shadow bled through the crack beneath it, as if feet stood just outside. She held her breath. A low whisper came from the other side, muffled but distinct. She pressed her ear closer to the door against every instinct screaming at her to stay back. The voice was female, soft and lilting, like a lullaby stripped of comfort. She couldn't make out the words, but the cadence was hypnotic, as though coaxing her closer, urging her to listen deeper. And then 3 knocks, sharp, deliberate. Her hand shot back from the wood as if burned. She stumbled toward the bed, fumbling for her phone, but when she pressed the screen, it wouldn't turn on. The battery had been nearly full when she left earlier, but now it was dead. A creak split the silence, not from the hallway, from the dresser. Her head whipped toward the mirror. The chair she'd wedged against it slid across the floor on its own, slow scraping against the wood. The mirror tilted again, lower this time, until it seemed to angle directly toward her. In the glass, she didn't see her own reflection. A woman stood where Nora should have been, tall, pale, her hair hanging in tangled sheets around her face. Her eyes were hollow shadows, her mouth stretched into something between a smile and a grimace. Nora staggered back, her hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. The woman in the mirror leaned forward, pressing her hands against the inside of the glass. Long fingers left streaks across the surface, and then, in a voice that seemed to seep into the very walls, she whispered the same words again. "Welcome back." The bulb overhead flickered violently and burst, showering the room in sparks and plunging it into darkness. The darkness was thick, oppressive, as though the very walls of room 213 had exhaled and swallowed the light whole. Nora froze where she stood, her ears straining against the silence that followed the bulb's shatter. For a few long seconds, there was nothing. No hiss of the radiator, no street sounds from outside, No whisper of air at all. Just a heavy stillness like being buried alive. Then faintly the mirror groaned. It was not the sound of shifting wood or tilting glass. It was a low, guttural creak, like something heavy dragging itself from the depths. Nora's pulse pounded against her temples as she fumbled blindly in the dark, her hands searching for her suitcase for anything that might ground her. Her fingers grazed the notebook. She froze. It was warm to the touch. Before she could recoil, the surface beneath her fingertips began to thrum. Not a vibration like machinery, but a pulse, steady, human, alive. She jerked her hand away and stumbled back into the edge of the bed. The springs screeched under her weight, too loud in the deadened silence. And then came the breathing. It filled the room all at once, a slow inhalation that rattled, strained, as though lungs long unused had found life again. The sound seemed to come from every corner surrounding her. She spun toward the window, hoping for the faint glow of street lamps. But the curtains hung shut and heavy, thick as theater drapes. Something shifted in the mirror. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't help it. Her eyes dragged toward the dresser, toward that slanted pane of glass. Even in the absence of light, she could see her reflection, or what should have been her reflection, outlined faintly in pale silver. But she wasn't alone in the image. The woman was there again, looming just behind her reflection. Closer this time. Her face was clearer in the dark than it had been, and the light features stretched jaw unhinged ever so slightly, as if it wanted to open wider still. And her hand, her impossibly long hand, pressed flat against the inside of the glass. Nora staggered backward, hitting the nightstand. The lamp rattled and fell, thudding onto the floor, but not breaking. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The whisper returned, brushing the inside of her ear, though she knew no one stood behind her. You should not have come back. Her mouth went dry. She wanted to scream, to demand what it meant, but her voice died in her throat. The air was too thick, as though the room itself pressed down on her lungs. And then 3 soft knocks, not from the hallway this time, from inside the mirror. Her knees buckled, and she crawled toward the door, desperate fingers fumbling with the lock. She turned it once, twice it jammed. She yanked harder, heart hammering, but the metal refused to give. Behind her, the groaning deepened. She dared a glance over her shoulder. The mirror no longer reflected her at all. The dresser, the bed, the curtains, everything in the glass was wrong, twisted. The walls bent inward like the corridors of her dream, and the woman's figure moved through that warped space, slowly, deliberately drawing closer to the surface. Nora's throat broke into a sob. She slammed her palm against the door, but the wood swallowed. The sound deadened it. No one in the hallway would hear. Then from the mirror, a hairline crack split across the surface. A sound like glass under strain filled the room. The woman pressed closer, her distorted face stretching with a smile that reached far too wide. And in that instant, Nora knew the mirror wasn't simply reflecting. It was opening. The crack lengthened, spreading like a vein of lightning across the mirror's face. Each sharp snap echoed through the room, shivering up Nora's spine. She pressed her back against the locked door, every nerve taut, her hands trembling as though she were already holding ice. The woman inside the glass leaned close, her pale forehead pressing against the surface. With every new fracture, the mirror gave a sound like brittle bone breaking. Nora's breath came in shallow gasps. The thing in the glass was no longer a presence she could ignore. It was pushing through, insisting on entering. The lamp on the floor flickered to life without being plugged in, its dim glow stretching shadows into unnatural shapes. Nora's own outline trembled against the wall, but the shadow didn't move when she did. It lingered, warped head, tilted at an angle she hadn't made. Her stomach turned nausea, rising in waves. Then came the smell, rot, thick and sweet, like spoiled fruit left in the sun. It seeped from the mirror, curling around her like smoke, and she gagged, pressing her sleeve against her mouth. The glass began to drip thick black liquid, oozing from the cracks pooling onto the dresser and seeping into the floorboards with a slow, hungry hiss. Nora forced herself to her feet, clawing at the lock again. This time, it gave metal scraping against metal. She yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air that wasn't heavy with decay. The corridor stretched before her, dimly lit with its old brass sconces, their bulbs buzzing faintly. But she wasn't alone there either. Down the hall by the farthest light stood a figure. Too still. Too tall. Its head tilted to the side, watching her without eyes she could see. The shadow it cast stretched impossibly long, reaching toward her feet. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She ran. Bare soles slapped the carpet, the air thick and stale as she passed door after door, each identical and endless. The corridor seemed longer than it had before, a tunnel that refused to end. She risked a glance behind her. The figure hadn't moved, yet somehow it was closer. Every light she passed flickered, dying as though drained by her presence. The farther she ran, the darker it became, until she was swallowed in a patchwork of shadows and dying bulbs. Her chest burned, legs trembling. Finally, she reached the stairwell. She burst through the heavy door, letting it slam behind her, and staggered down the steps 2 at a time. Her hand skimmed the railing, slick with something damp. She didn't dare look too closely. Her ears caught the sound of movement above. Slow, deliberate. Each step creaked as something descended after her. She clutched the railing tighter and forced herself downward, the air growing colder with every flight. The hum of the hotel below voices music. Faint laughter should have reached her by now, but the stairwell remained silent. At the landing between floors, she froze. The walls of the stairwell no longer looked like aged plaster. They pulsed faintly like the inside of something alive. And the steps beneath her feet felt soft, sagging as if she were sinking into flesh. Nora backed against the wall, bile rising in her throat. The silence above broke. Something heavy shifted, dragging along the steps closer. Closer still. She shut her eyes, pressing her forehead to the cool surface behind her. But the surface was not cool. It was warm, beating. Her eyes shot open, and for one terrible moment she realized the hotel was breathing. Nora stumbled back from the wall, her hand damp with something that was not dust, not paint, but clammy moisture, like sweat. The stairwell pulsed again, faint but undeniable, as though she stood inside the chest cavity of something enormous. Her knees nearly buckled, yet her legs carried her onward down another flight, desperate for escape. The dragging sound above grew louder. Not footsteps, not shoes. It was the weight of something vast, its body scraping the walls as it descended. Each groan of the stairwell echoed through her ribs. She reached the next landing and shoved at the door, but it wouldn't budge. The brass knob twisted loosely, useless, as if the door were a painting nailed to the wall rather than an exit. She clawed at it anyway, her fingernails scraping against the wood until splinters dug beneath her skin. A low laugh drifted down from above. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound slithered into her ears, warm and wet, curling like smoke into her skull. Her breath caught. "Welcome back," it purred. Nora bolted down another flight, each step sinking pliant beneath her weight. Her fingers brushed the railing again, and she recoiled, slick, with something thicker than water, leaving strings that clung to her skin. The lights flickered, stuttered, then died, plunging her into darkness. But she wasn't blind, not entirely. The walls glowed faintly now, veins of red threading through the plaster like capillaries illuminated beneath pale skin. Every pulse shivered through her body, matching her racing heartbeat. The dragging grew closer. She turned her head upward too fast, and for an instant she saw it, a shape at the bend of the stairs. Vast, crawling. Its limbs bent the wrong way, joints bowing, fingers clawing along the walls. Its head lolled to one side, hair-matted face too pale. And though it moved slowly, inexorably, the air itself seemed to warp in its wake. Nora's scream clawed at her throat, but she forced it down, afraid of what answering it might summon. She kept running. Another landing. Another door. This one gave when she shoved. She fell forward into a hallway she didn't recognize. The air here was colder. The walls narrower, painted a dull red that peeled in strips. The carpet was patterned in sharp diamonds that seemed to shift if she stared too long, pulling her gaze deeper into their angles. And unlike the stairwell, this corridor carried a sound, whispers, dozens of them layered and overlapping like 100 conversations spoken just below hearing. Some wept, some laughed, some recited things like prayers or curses. She turned to shut the stairwell door behind her to seal the crawling thing away. But the door was gone. The wall was solid, seamless, as though she'd imagined the escape. The whispers grew louder. Her skin prickled with the sensation of eyes watching from every direction. The sconces overhead flickered shadows spilling long across the hall. One door ahead of her creaked open, slowly, patiently. Nora's feet refused to move. The dark slit of the doorway widened, and within it, she glimpsed a room lit by dim amber light. Furniture sat crooked, draped in sheets yellowed with age. A single figure sat on the edge of the bed, back hunched, hair wild. The whispers hushed all at once. The figure turned its head toward her slowly, so slowly. And though the face was obscured in shadow, she knew. It was her, sitting there staring back, eyes wide and hollow, a faint smile pulling at her lips. Nora staggered backward, her heel catching on the carpet. The whispers surged again, filling her skull until her vision blurred. The other Nora rose from the bed, her movements sharp, twitching like a puppet tugged on tangled strings. And as she stepped forward, her voice spilled into the hall in a ragged whisper. Too familiar, too wrong. You never should have come back. Nora's chest seized as the other version of herself stepped fully into the corridor. Her shadow stretched impossibly long along the peeling red walls, swallowing the diamond patterns beneath her feet. The air pressed heavier, colder. Every instinct screamed at Nora to run, yet her legs felt carved from stone. The other Nora tilted her head, strands of dark hair sliding across her face. Her smile widened, cracking at the edges, as if her skin weren't meant to stretch that far. When she spoke again, her voice doubled, layered with another tone. Deeper, distorted, the sound of two throats speaking at once. You belong here now. The whispers returned, rushing around them like a tide, and the corridor itself seemed to contract. The walls groaned as though they were breathing in. Nora staggered back, her hand brushing the cold brass of a door handle. Without thinking, she twisted it and hurled herself inside. The door slammed behind her with a force that rattled the frame. She was in another room, though it did not feel like any hotel room she had seen before. The wallpaper sagged with water stains, yellowed and peeling. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted like a body had been thrashing there moments before. A single lamp glowed weakly, though its cord trailed into the wall and vanished. Nora pressed her back against the door, ears straining. Silence. No footsteps, no whispers. But she could feel it, her other self waiting on the other side. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees against her chest. For the first time since entering, the Chelsea tears stung her eyes. The fear was relentless, gnawing at her bones. She wanted to believe she was dreaming, but the stench of mildew and dust in her lungs was too real. The lamp flickered. Her head snapped up. The air shifted. She wasn't alone. In the corner by the window where the shadows were deepest, something stirred. A figure sat there, small, hunched, rocking back and forth. Its breathing was shallow, labored like someone choking on smoke. Nora rose slowly, her legs trembling. She edged toward the dresser eyes, never leaving the dark shape. It stopped rocking. The silence between them stretched taut, humming like a wire pulled too tight. Then the figure spoke. "She never leaves." Nora's throat closed. The voice was ragged, high-pitched, almost childlike, but frayed with age. The figure leaned forward into the dim lamplight, revealing a face sunken, and pale lips split, and dry eyes bloodshot and bulging. Hair hung in uneven clumps, tangled with dust. "She never leaves," it repeated louder this time, its lips curling back to reveal teeth cracked down to the gums. "She keeps them. All of them." Nora's breath faltered. "Who?" The figure snapped its head toward her with a sudden violence, neck popping audibly. "The woman in the mirror," it rasped, spittle flying from its mouth. Nora staggered back until her legs struck the bed frame. Her stomach lurched with cold recognition. The face she had seen in her own reflection. The figure rose, bones cracking like old wood, its limbs trembling but eager. It began to shuffle toward her bare feet, dragging across the floorboards, leaving faint black smears behind. Nora scrambled onto the bed, pressing against the headboard, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon. But the room had given her nothing but shadows and whispers. The figure stopped at the edge of the mattress. Its eyes widened, and in a voice louder than before, shrill and piercing, it screamed, "She's already inside you." The lamp shattered, plunging the room into darkness. Nora's scream joined the fragments of glass raining across the floor. The darkness pressed against Nora like a second skin, thick and suffocating. Her scream died in her throat, swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed the shattering of the lamp. Tiny shards of glass crunched beneath bare feet as the figure from the corner shuffled closer, its ragged breath slicing through the still air. Nora clawed backward along the headboard, her hands trembling so violently that her fingers barely obeyed her. The bed sagged, as though something heavy had settled beside her, though she could see nothing in the dark. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Then faintly, almost imperceptibly, came the sound of whispering again. But this time it wasn't outside the door. It was in the room. It was inside her skull. "She's in you already." The words slithered through her mind, too smooth to belong to the broken figure that had spoken before. This voice was steady, deliberate, female, low, and commanding. Nora squeezed her eyes shut, but the darkness remained the same behind her lids. A pressure built between her temples, a slow throb like hands pressing inward, trying to pry her open. She pressed her palms to her face, fighting the invasive pull, but the voice only grew stronger. "Look." Her eyes snapped open against her will. Across the room, the shattered remains of the lamp reflected fragments of dim light that shouldn't exist in this blackness. And in each jagged piece of glass, her reflection stared back, not with terror, but with calm, knowing eyes. The reflections all smiled in unison. The figure by the window lurched closer, bones crackling, and as the dim light caught its face again, Nora saw the truth. Its features were blurred, shifting a dozen faces layered atop one another, some weeping, some laughing, some silent. All of them trapped their mouths, opening and closing in frantic repetition. They never leave it, hissed again, but now Nora heard it differently. Not as a threat, as a warning. The reflections on the floor tilted their heads at once. "She's watching." The words echoed through the room, not from one mouth, but from countless unseen throats. Nora leapt from the bed, desperate to break the spell, but her foot landed hard on a shard of glass. Pain seared through her heel, warm blood trailing behind as she staggered toward the door. She yanked the handle, praying for it to move this time. It opened. The hallway beyond had changed again. The red walls were gone, replaced by endless rows of tarnished mirrors stretching out in both directions. Each one reflected her figure, but not as she was. Some mirrors showed her older, gaunt eyes blackened. Others revealed her face twisted in silent screams, or her hands drenched in blood. And in one directly across from her, she wasn't alone. A woman stood at her side, cloaked in black lace, her face obscured beneath a wide hat. The figure loomed tall, elegant, but faceless, the absence of features somehow more terrifying than any expression. Her gloved hand rested gently on Nora's shoulder in the reflection. Though Nora felt nothing, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Every reflection of herself began to turn their heads slowly toward the faceless woman. The corridor hummed with a pressure that bent her spine. The woman's hand lifted still, only visible in the reflection, and pointed deeper into the mirrored corridor. Nora's throat ached as she whispered, "Why me?" Her reflected self. The one with the blood-soaked hands pressed her mouth to the glass lips, splitting into a smile too wide, whispering back, "Because you opened the door." The mirrors began to rattle. One by one they cracked, and something on the other side started to come through. The mirrors screamed as they split glass, shrieking like 1,000 knives dragged across stone. Shards rained down around Nora, slicing the air, catching her arms and face in stinging cuts. She stumbled backward into the doorframe, but the hallway had already dissolved its boundaries, erased by a storm of splintered reflections. Beyond the broken glass was not more corridor, not more hotel. It was a void, an abyss of shifting faces, each pressed against the glass like prisoners straining to break free. Their mouths opened in silent cries, eyes bulging, hands slapping against the invisible barrier. Some looked like strangers, others looked disturbingly like her, and in every fractured surface the faceless woman remained unchanged, unshaken, patient, her black-gloved hand extended once more, the gesture smooth, deliberate, demanding. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The figure from the bedroom shuffled into the hall, dragging its ruined feet, its body convulsing as more faces rippled across its skin. It dropped to its knees before the woman's reflection, head bowed as though in worship. Nora's stomach twisted. The woman finally moved. Not in the mirror this time, the air itself bent. Her presence stepped out of reflection, emerging piece by piece as if sliding between dimensions. Lace first, then the curve of her wide hat, the outline of her shoulders, and finally the abyss where her face should be. A faint hum filled the corridor, the kind of sound that digs into the teeth and skull, making them ache. Nora pressed herself flat against the wall, her chest heaving. The woman turned toward her, though, without a face. Nora couldn't tell if she was truly being seen. The gesture alone was enough to hollow her out. A thin hand rose, palm out. The hum stopped. Nora froze her breath, locked in her chest. Then the faceless woman's hand curled inward like a closing claw, and the mirrors obeyed. Her reflections moved on their own, dragging their bloody, broken, and decayed selves through the glass. One by one, they stumbled into the hallway surrounding Nora in a tightening circle. Each one whispered the same phrase over and over, though their mouths barely moved. "She wants you back." Nora shook her head, tears streaking her dust-stained cheeks. "Back from where I don't." Her own words cut off as her throat constricted. One of the reflections stepped closer, its eyes hollowed and lips sewn shut, yet its voice filled the corridor. "You never left." The world tilted. Memories slipped at the edges of her mind. Shadows of things she didn't remember living her body, lying in a bathtub full of cold water, wrists pale and open. Her face pressed against hotel sheets that smelled of blood and dust. Her own shadow lingering longer than she walked. "No," she whispered. "That's not me. That never happened." The faceless woman extended her hand again, and Nora's body betrayed her. Her feet lifted, dragged forward by invisible strings, glass shards cutting into her bare soles. Her struggling hands only trembled, too weak to resist. The circle of reflections parted, letting her through as though she were being offered up. Nora's heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might snap. The woman leaned close, her face a black, endless hollow. Nora stared into it, and in the darkness she saw movement. Rooms upon rooms, corridors that looped forever, people screaming behind locked doors, and herself countless times trapped in different rooms whispering against the walls for someone to hear her. It was not a void, it was a cage. The woman tilted her head as if waiting for Nora's acceptance. And then, just as the black void threatened to swallow her whole, a new sound broke through, faint, muffled, but piercing in its clarity. A door slammed. Somewhere down the corridor beyond the storm of glass, someone else had arrived. For the first time, the faceless woman faltered. The slam reverberated like thunder rolling through the bones of the Chelsea. For an instant, the humming silence fractured, and the swarm of mirror shadows staggered their whispers, thinning into broken echoes. Nora's body suspended as though on invisible strings dropped heavily to the floor. Her knees cracked against the shards, a hot wave of pain grounding her in the present. She gasped, clutching her bleeding palms, and raised her head toward the sound. At the far end of the corridor, a figure emerged from the gloom. A man. Tall shoulders, stooped coat hanging loose as though soaked through. His boots left wet prints across the warped carpet. His head was bowed, obscuring his face, but Nora saw enough, the tremble of his hands, the way his shadow stretched unnaturally long across the broken glass. The faceless woman turned slowly. The black hollow of her face seemed to widen, an abyss yawning open. The mirrors rattled in recognition. The circle of reflections hissed, as if disturbed from ritual. The man stopped, his voice a low rasp, ragged but steady. "You don't belong here." The words weren't spoken to Nora. They were meant for the woman. A vibration coursed through the corridor, deeper than sound, like the hotel itself reacting to a blasphemy. Lamps flickered violently. Dust cascaded from the ceiling like falling ash. The woman raised her hand, sharp and deliberate. The mirrored shadows tightened their circle again, but this time their whispers were dissonant, breaking into screams as though some were resisting her call. The man finally lifted his head. His face was pale, almost translucent, his eyes sunken and rimmed in shadow. Yet there was a ferocity in his gaze that cut through the paralysis that bound Nora. He stepped forward. Every mirror he passed cracked further, unable to hold their fractured visions. The faceless woman's hand twitched. The man hissed back, his voice like torn metal. "You took her once. You won't take her again." Nora's heart pounded. Who was he talking about? The faceless woman tilted her head with a slow, almost mocking grace. Then her gloved fingers snapped shut. The mirrors exploded outward. A tidal wave of glass and shadow surged toward the man. The corridor dissolved into chaos, faces, shrieking walls, buckling fragments of other rooms bleeding through the hallway, a stairwell leading nowhere, a bathtub full of black water, a typewriter clacking furiously in an empty room. The man braced himself, hands trembling as though forcing something unseen into the air. The wave of shards met an invisible wall inches before him, suspended mid-air, vibrating with impossible force. Nora crawled backward against the wall, her breath shallow, every muscle urging her to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The man's gaze flicked to her, sharp and knowing. "Run when she falters. It won't last long." His warning rooted itself in her chest. Her instincts screamed to move, but her body stayed frozen, hypnotized by the battle before her. The faceless woman's abyss of a face began to ripple as though dozens of screaming mouths tried to push through from within. The sound was unbearable, a rising wail that bent the corridor into knots. The man roared back, and for a moment it seemed he might be able to force her back. The suspended glass trembled violently, then shot backward toward the woman, stabbing into her form, dissolving as they vanished into the void of her face. The shadows recoiled. The corridor wavered. Nora seized the moment, scrambling to her feet despite the glass tearing into her soles. The man's command echoed in her mind. Run when she falters, and falter she did. The faceless woman staggered for the first time, her lace trembling as though the fabric itself had grown old and thin. The abyss dimmed, flickering between darkness and a mirror-sheen surface. Nora bolted. Her lungs burned as she sprinted past the twisting reflections, the floor lurching beneath her like the hotel wanted to swallow her whole. Doors slammed open and shut on either side, glimpses of lives long extinguished, flashing by musicians, writing songs they never finished. Lovers screaming in endless arguments, children crying for mothers who never answered, and behind it all the sound of something vast and angry rising again. The man's voice roared once more, cutting through the chaos. Don't look back. Nora didn't, but she felt the air behind her collapse, as though the woman was tearing through the walls, closing in with a hunger that could not be contained. The hallway bent, as if alive, its walls swelling outward, then collapsing tight enough that Nora scraped her shoulders against peeling plaster as she ran. Her breath caught in ragged bursts, every step punctuated by the sharp sting of glass lodged in her bare feet. But she didn't stop. Behind her, the storm roared. It wasn't just the faceless woman anymore. It was the entire hotel, groaning, screaming, dragging itself awake. Floors shook, light bulbs burst in showers of sparks, and somewhere deep inside, voices rose in a single anguished choir. Nora stumbled around a corner and nearly fell, her hand slamming against the wall for balance. The wallpaper beneath her palm felt warm, as though blood pumped through it. A door stood ajar ahead, leaking a faint golden light. It looked absurdly ordinary compared to the chaos erupting behind her. Without thinking, she shoved her way inside. The room was silent. It was almost disappointingly plain, an old hotel room with faded floral curtains, a narrow bed with a brass headboard, a desk beneath a dusty mirror. But the air was thick, unmoving, the kind of silence that didn't belong in the living world. Nora shut the door behind her, pressed her back against it, and tried to steady her breath. The golden light came from a lamp on the desk, flickering softly. Its glow reflected in the mirror, which seemed clearer than the cracked ones she had seen in the hall. Her own face stared back, drawn pale, streaked with dust and blood. She looked like a stranger. A sound broke the stillness. A cough. Nora's head snapped toward the bed. The man sat there, his coat draped over the edge, his thin hands trembling as he pressed them against his knees. His translucent skin shimmered in the lamplight, almost see-through in places, as though parts of him were fading. Yet, his eyes, dark, sunken, restless, pinned her where she stood. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped. Nora's throat went dry. "I didn't." He shook his head, cutting her off. "No one just comes here. She draws them in. Always has. You felt it, didn't you? That little tug when you first walked through the doors. That strange comfort, like you belonged." Nora swallowed hard. She had felt something that night she checked in, an odd pull, like the Chelsea itself had been waiting for her. She hadn't questioned it then. The man leaned forward. "That's how she feeds. She finds the lonely ones, the wandering ones, the broken ones who think they're safe inside her walls. She doesn't chase. She invites. And once you answer, she never lets go." Nora's heart raced. "But you," she stammered. "You fought her. You stopped her out there. You can stop her again, can't you?" The man gave a hollow laugh, the sound cracking like old wood. "I didn't stop her. I slowed her. That's all I've ever been able to do." He lifted his sleeve. His forearm was covered in scars, deep blackened gashes that pulsed faintly with light. Not blood. Light. "She marked me years ago. I thought I escaped, but you don't escape the Chelsea. You just wander until she calls again." Nora stared at him, horror sinking into her bones. The man leaned closer, his voice dropping low. "She doesn't want me this time. She wants you." The lamp flickered. Nora stiffened. In the mirror above the desk, her reflection no longer sat where she stood. It had moved just slightly, its head tilted toward her with a smile that her real face wasn't wearing. Her breath hitched. The man's voice sharpened, urgent. "Don't look too long. That's how she pulls you through." Nora staggered back from the desk, but the mirror pulsed with light, her reflection rippling like water. Behind her doppelganger, the faceless woman stood, her black lace bleeding outward into every corner of the glass. The man grabbed her wrist with a trembling hand. His skin was ice, but his grip was unyielding. "You have to decide," he said. "Either you fight her or you become her. That's the truth no one tells you." Nora's head spun, panic clawing at her ribs. "What does that mean?" "Become her." The man's hollow eyes burned into hers. "The Chelsea always needs a keeper." The mirror cracked. A spiderweb fissure split her reflection, but the doppelganger inside grinned wider, blood leaking from the break, as if the mirror itself bled. And then the lights went out. The darkness fell like a curtain, swallowing the room whole. Nora's pulse thundered in her ears. She couldn't see the man, couldn't see the mirror, only the faint outline of the bed and the sound of her own jagged breathing. Then came the whisper. It wasn't from the faceless woman this time. It wasn't even from the mirror. The whisper rose from the walls themselves, from the old wood and cracked plaster, as though the Chelsea had opened its 1,000 mouths at once. "Stay with us." Nora pressed her palms against her ears. But the voices were inside her head now, an endless chorus, coaxing, pleading, demanding. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until she could hardly breathe. The man's voice broke through, raw and urgent. "Don't listen." That's how it begins. A flare of golden light snapped on. The desk lamp flickered weakly, bathing the room in a trembling glow. The man was standing now, his trembling form bent but determined. His hand clutched the bedpost as though anchoring himself against the weight of unseen waves. "You want answers," he rasped, staring at her with feverish eyes. "Then listen, because she won't let me tell you twice." Nora swallowed hard, forcing words past the lump in her throat. What is she?" The man's gaze shifted toward the mirror, now cracked, but still pulsing faintly with its own light. "She isn't a ghost. Not exactly. Ghosts are fragments, shards of grief, rage, longing. But she's the binding, the net. Every spirit lost here, every soul too broken to leave, she gathers them, weaves them together, wears them like a mask. That's why she's faceless. She's all of them at once." Nora shuddered. "Why me? Why now?" The man's laugh was brittle, collapsing under its own weight. "Because it's her turn again. The Chelsea's heart doesn't beat without a keeper. Someone to wear the weight, someone to draw the lost ones in. She's thinning, you saw it. She can't hold herself much longer, and when she breaks, she'll need a replacement." The words sank into Nora like ice water. Her stomach churned. "A replacement," she whispered. "Me." The lamp flickered violently. The mirror's crack widened, blood, thick black and gleaming, seeping from its edges. Nora's reflection inside smiled sweetly, head tilted with a mockery of compassion. The man's grip on the bedpost tightened until the wood groaned. I was supposed to be her vessel once. I resisted, barely. But I learned something she doesn't want anyone to know. Nora's head jerked up. "What?" He lowered his voice, every syllable like a blade against the silence. "The Chelsea was built on borrowed bones. They said it was iron and brick, but beneath it, buried in its foundation, are the remains of the first who tried to bind her. They thought they could contain her by trapping her inside these walls. They failed. But those bones, that blood, they're still here. And they're the only thing she fears." Nora's breath caught. "Where?" The man's hollow eyes flicked toward the door. "The basement. But it isn't the basement anymore. She's twisted it, turned it into something else. If you go down, you may never come back up. The walls pulsed again, the voices louder, more insistent. Stay, become, join us. The mirror rattled violently. Her reflection slammed its hands against the glass from the inside, each impact cracking the surface further. The faceless woman loomed behind it, her black lace pouring outward like smoke. The man staggered forward, thrusting something cold and metallic into Nora's palm. She looked down, a rusted key, its teeth worn and bent, but pulsing faintly with the same golden light as the lamp. "It'll open what's left of the old passage," he whispered hoarsely. "Find the foundation. Find the bones. That's the only chance you have to end her." Nora clutched the key, her hand trembling. The mirror gave one last shattering scream before a fissure split it wide open, light and shadow pouring into the room. The faceless woman stepped through. Her figure was clearer now, more solid. The lace shimmered, her movements sharper, predatory. The abyss where her face should be opened wider, a hollow maw pulling the air around it. The man's form flickered like a candle in the wind. He turned to Nora, desperation cutting through his fading voice. "Run, before she takes us both." The lamp shattered, plunging the room into a storm of darkness and whispering voices. Nora bolted for the door, the rusted key burning in her grip. Nora hurled herself into the hallway, the door slamming behind her with a force that rattled the frame. The key in her fist felt hot now, pulsing like a heartbeat, dragging her forward even as the walls of the Chelsea shifted around her. The hallway was no longer what she remembered. Its angles bent wrong, corners stretched too far, doors melted into the plaster, their brass knobs sinking as though the hotel itself were swallowing them whole. The carpet rippled beneath her feet, like the back of some buried creature. She ran. Behind her came the rustle of lace, soft, deliberate, unhurried. The faceless woman didn't chase like a hunter desperate for prey. She advanced like inevitability, each step a quiet promise that Nora had nowhere to go but down. The stairwell appeared at the end of the corridor, but it wasn't the grand staircase she had climbed on her first night. This one was narrow iron steps spiraling downward into darkness that seemed endless. The rail was slick beneath her palm, leaving a film of something warm and metallic on her skin. Blood, or the memory of it. The key pulsed harder, guiding her down. Each step groaned under her weight, the echoes falling into a void too deep for a hotel's basement. Nora's breath fogged the air as she descended, the temperature dropping until it felt like she was stepping into the lungs of something dead. Halfway down she froze. The whispers were louder here, but they weren't incoherent anymore. They were names. Names spoken over and over again. Dozens, hundreds, all tangled into one another until the sound became unbearable. She pressed her hand against her temple, trying to push them back, but they forced their way in memories that weren't hers, searing across her mind. Lives ended within these walls, voices begging not to be forgotten. At the bottom of the staircase, the door waited. Heavy iron-bound, its surface covered in symbols gouged deep into the metal. The key burned her palm until she nearly dropped it. The faceless woman was close now. Nora didn't have to turn to know she could feel the air thinning her lungs, refusing to fill properly. Her body leaning toward that hollow absence where a face should be. Her hand trembled as she forced the key into the lock. It turned with a grinding shriek. The door swung open. The basement stretched before her, but it wasn't any basement she had ever seen. The walls were jagged stone, slick with moisture. The ceiling arched like the ribs of a cathedral, but crooked, broken, bending inward as though trying to collapse on her. Candles burned in recesses along the walls, their flames steady despite the absence of air. The floor was uneven, littered with bones. The bones weren't whole. They were fragments, skulls split in half femurs, shattered ribs bent into impossible shapes. They were fused into the very foundation, cement and marrow indistinguishable. It was a burial ground, masquerading as a building's underbelly. Nora's stomach lurched, bile rising in her throat. The whispers fell silent. For the first time since she entered the Chelsea, there was no sound, no voices, no rustle of lace, no breath but her own. The silence pressed on her like a weight heavier than any scream, and then she saw it. At the center of the chamber, the foundation stone stood, enormous, blackened, veined with something that gleamed faintly like gold beneath the candlelight. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. The key in her hand quivered, eager, desperate. Behind her, the faceless woman entered the chamber. Her lace dress trailed across the bones, her hollow visage tilting toward Nora. The silence shattered. The voices screamed. Not whispers now, but screams, painful, furious, endless. The walls shook with it. Nora staggered forward, the key dragging her toward the foundation stone. She knew without being told that this was the heart of it all, that if she drove the key into its cracks, something would happen, something final. But her reflection was already waiting for her, standing beside the stone, smiling with her face holding out its hand. "Don't break it," the doppelganger whispered, though its lips didn't move. The words arrived directly in Nora's mind. "If you break it, you break us. We are you. You are us. All you've lost, all you've suffered, it can stay here. It can live forever." The faceless woman drew closer, her lace brushing the air at Nora's back. The chamber seemed to close in the walls, bending bones, rattling as if restless. The key burned brighter, begging to be used. Nora's hand shook. To strike or to surrender. The choice pressed on her like the weight of the entire hotel. Nora's knuckles whitened around the key. The foundation stone pulsed beneath the candlelight, each throb echoing in her ribs like a second heartbeat. The air reeked of damp iron, of old blood seared into stone. The faceless woman loomed closer, her lace spreading outward like smoke, filling every corner of the chamber. The absence where her face should be widened, pulling at Nora's very thoughts. Her body wanted to lean forward, to fall into that void, and never rise again. But the key seared her palm, and the pain snapped her back. She staggered toward the stone, every step an act of rebellion. The reflection blocked her path, smiling with her face eyes that weren't hers, glowing with warmth that felt like poison. "You'll kill us," it whispered again. "Not just her. All of us. Every name you heard on the stairs. Do you want that burden to end us, to silence what remains?" The words clawed at her conscience. The memories she had felt earlier, the flashes of lives stolen by the Chelsea, rose again. A child's laughter cut short, a woman's final scream, a man gasping for air as he drowned in his own blood. If she shattered the binding, would she free them or erase them forever? The faceless woman's lace brushed across Nora's shoulders. The touch was ice sinking into her bones. The reflection's smile widened. Or it cooed, tilting its head. "You can stay. Become what you were always meant to be. Keeper, heir, vessel. The pain will pass. The loneliness will fade. You will never have to leave. You will never be forgotten." The stone pulsed harder, cracks webbing across its surface. The chamber moaned with the strain of something ancient trying to resist, to contain itself. The voices of the lost rose up, not in screams this time, but in pleading. "Don't leave us. Don't kill us. Stay. Stay." Nora's breath came shallow, her mind fraying at the edges. She thought of her own life. The quiet griefs she carried. The solitude. The sense that something unseen had always followed her. Was that why the Chelsea had chosen her? Because she already belonged. The key trembled in her grip, begging to be driven home. Nora let out a low cry, half fury, half despair, and thrust the key into the largest crack in the stone. The chamber exploded with light, It wasn't golden or warm. It was searing white, the kind that stripped everything bare. The screams of the lost tore through the air as the foundation shuddered. Bones ripped free from mortar skulls, splitting ribs snapping like kindling. The walls convulsed as though alive veins of shadow bursting from the cracks. The faceless woman screamed a sound that shook the marrow of Nora's bones. Her lace writhed violently, tearing itself apart, as though every thread contained a fragment of her stolen form. Her hollow visage warped, collapsing inward until it became a gaping wound in reality itself. Nora was thrown backward, the key still lodged in the stone. The reflection staggered, clutching its face as fissures split across its skin. "No!" it shrieked in Nora's own voice. "You don't understand. You'll unmake us all." The chamber floor buckled, sending bones and fragments tumbling into a widening chasm. Candles snuffed out one by one, their smoke curling upward like last prayers. The man appeared again in the chaos, flickering like a ghost on fire. His eyes were wide with terror, but also something else, relief. "You did it," he gasped. "God help us, you did it." But the foundation stone cracked, fully splitting down the middle. A roar erupted, not a voice, not human, but the sound of something vast and ancient being torn apart. The faceless woman collapsed, her form unraveling into ash. The lace dissolved, mid-air threads scattering like burnt paper. For one heartbeat, the silence that followed was absolute, and then the floor gave way. The chamber fell into darkness, dragging everything with it. Bones, stone, the last remnants of the faceless woman. And Nora, too, her body plummeting into the void, the echo of screams, both human and not, whipping past her ears. The only thing she held on to was the faint heat of the key still burning in her palm. And then nothing. Nora awoke with a start, her body stiff on a bed she didn't remember lying in. The ceiling above her was familiar, the ornate tin tiles of the Chelsea, but the pattern shifted, curling and rearranging like living metal. She sat up too quickly, her head pounding, the taste of smoke still thick on her tongue. Her room looked the same. The wallpaper still peeled in long strips, the velvet curtains sagged with age, the lamp cast its sickly yellow glow. And yet, everything was wrong. The walls breathed. She could see the subtle rise and fall, like lungs, inhaling and exhaling. Shadows pooled unnaturally in the corners, and when her eyes tried to follow their movement, they darted just out of reach. The air was heavy, pressing against her chest, though no window was open. She turned to the nightstand. The key lay there, clean, polished, as if it had never been dragged through blood or forced into stone. Her hand hovered over it, unwilling to touch. The silence pressed in too hard, so she whispered to herself, just to break it, "It's over." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The hotel stirred around her. A faint hum threaded through the walls, low and constant, like the sound of a generator buried deep underground. From the hall came the distant thud of footsteps, too slow, too deliberate. Her door rattled once, then stilled. Nora froze, every nerve screaming for her not to breathe. The knob didn't turn, the steps didn't return, but the silence after was worse than if something had entered. She glanced at the mirror across the room. Her reflection didn't move. It sat there frozen in place, smiling faintly with her face while she cowered on the bed. Nora's throat went dry. She stood slowly, forcing her legs to carry her across the warped carpet. The closer she came to the mirror, the more wrong her reflection looked. Its eyes shimmered too brightly, its lips curved just slightly too far. When she reached it, the glass rippled. Her reflection leaned forward, pressing its forehead against the inside of the mirror. Its lips moved, though no sound came through. Nora pressed her hand to the glass before she could stop herself. It was warm. Her reflection smiled wider, mouthing one word again and again, "Stay." The floor beneath her shifted, and for a moment she thought she might be falling again. But no. The hotel was folding inward corridors, twisting where doors had been windows appearing on ceilings instead of walls. She wasn't in the Chelsea anymore. She was in its other self, its shadow, its reflection. The hum in the walls deepened, vibrating through her bones. Her reflection raised its hand, mirroring her every movement, until with a sudden jerk, it pressed its palm against the other side of the glass, and then the glass cracked. A thin, jagged line split between their hands. Another fissure spread from the corner of the mirror to the floor. The reflection's eyes widened with hunger, not fear, as it pushed harder, the cracks webbing outward. Nora stumbled back, the walls groaning as the room warped further. The bed folded into the floor. The curtains writhed like snakes. The lamp bent until its light poured across the carpet in molten streams. The mirror shattered, but no shards fell. Instead, the reflection stepped through perfect and whole, wearing her face like a mask. Its eyes glowed with something older, something that had waited centuries for this moment. Nora backed away until her shoulders hit the breathing wall. Her double smiled, tilting its head. "We told you," it whispered, though its lips hardly moved. "Break it, and you break the door. Now we're free." The key on the nightstand rattled violently, then lifted into the air, glowing like a brand. Both of them reached for it at the same time. The hotel seemed to hold its breath. The key trembled in the air, spinning lazily between them, as if savoring the moment. Its metallic hum filled the warped room, resonating through the walls and floor. Nora's hand darted out first, but her double moved with equal speed, their fingers colliding in the glow. The contact was unbearable. It was like touching a live wire. Heat seared up Nora's arm, and she screamed, jerking back, but her reflection clung to her wrist with impossible strength. Their eyes locked, and for the first time, Nora understood this thing wasn't just an echo of her. It was every hunger the hotel had swallowed distilled into her shape. Her double's lips curled into a grin, whispering, "You've done so well for us. Now let me finish it." The key bent toward the reflection, pulled by some unseen magnet. Nora yanked her arm, desperate nails digging into the cold flesh of her other self. She felt nothing, no skin, no blood, just hollowness pretending to be her. The mirror woman leaned close, voice like silk dragged over broken glass. "It's easier if you stop fighting. Stay. Be still. Let me carry you where you belong." The word belong struck a hidden chord deep in Nora's chest. The loneliness she had buried all her life rose like a tide, the quiet apartments, the empty dinners, the muted grief no one else ever saw. Hadn't she always been walking toward this? A vessel shaped for something that waited. The hotel pulsed around them, walls bowing inward. The floor beneath her warped, tilting toward the reflection. Objects slid across the carpet. The lamp, the twisted bed frame, the scraps of curtain, all gravitating toward the thing wearing her face. Nora's legs buckled, but rage flared hot through her veins. "No," she whispered hoarsely. She threw herself forward, not away, but into the reflection, tackling it with every ounce of strength left in her. The impact knocked the key loose, sending it clattering across the floor. For a heartbeat, they were two forms blurring together in the shadow of the hotel's breath. She could see inside it just for an instant, the void where its soul should have been, the voices of the lost screaming through its hollow chest, and in the center of it all, a hunger older than her bloodline stretching back to the very foundation of the Chelsea. Her vision swam. The double's face flickered, cycling through other visages, men, women, children, all with those glowing eyes, all smiling too wide. She rolled desperate, slamming her shoulder against the warped floor until she felt splinters bite her skin. Her hand found the key. Hot. Alive. The reflection shrieked, lunging forward, its nails black and elongated, slicing through the air. Nora held the key out like a talisman, its light blinding in the dim room. The double stopped inches away, its grin twisting into a snarl. Its voice dropped layered with countless others. "That doesn't belong to you. It belongs to us." The hotel shook violently as if agreeing, the breathing walls convulsing in fury. The key burned in Nora's palm, its hum rising higher until it pierced her ears. Her vision narrowed to the thing before her, the false self that wanted to replace her, to erase her, to step into her skin and walk out into the world. Nora closed her eyes, lifted the key high, and drove it straight into the reflection's chest. The scream that followed wasn't human. It was the hotel itself. The floor cracked wide open. The walls peeled like paper. The ceiling caved in, revealing not sky, but an endless starless void. The reflection writhed around the key, its body fracturing into glassy shards that hovered mid-air before shattering into black dust. The key sank deeper, pulling itself through the creature and embedding into the floor beneath. And then silence. Nora collapsed to her knees, chest heaving, the air acrid with smoke and iron. The reflection was gone. The warped room stilled. The walls stopped breathing, but the hotel wasn't empty. From the far corner of the room, a whisper rose. Then another, and another. The voices of the lost, no longer screams, but something worse, a chant. They were chanting her name. Nora, Nora, Nora. Her stomach dropped. The key glowed faintly from where it stuck in the ground, and she understood, with a sick clarity, something hadn't been destroyed. Something had been awakened, and now it was calling her. The chant swelled until it filled every corner of the room, seeping through the walls, vibrating through the floorboards beneath her knees. Nora clutched her ears, but it wasn't sound. It was inside her, humming in her bones, curling into the hollow spaces of her chest. Her name repeated over and over, no longer a call but a claim. Nora, Nora, Nora. The key pulsed faintly where it had embedded itself in the warped floor, as though marking her, binding her to the chorus. She stared at it, breath ragged, the glow dim and sickly now, almost organic, like the last heartbeat of a dying creature. She staggered to her feet. The air had shifted. The room was no longer her room. The wallpaper had stripped away completely, leaving behind raw bricks slick with condensation. The ceiling sagged low and uneven. The door had disappeared, entirely swallowed by the wall. The Chelsea had closed around her. "No," she whispered. Her voice sounded thin, frail. "You don't get to keep me." The chant slowed. The voices listened. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. She turned to the only object left besides the key, the mirror frame now empty, its glass shattered into nothing. But as she moved closer, the frame flickered. Not with her reflection. With something else. A hallway stretched beyond it, impossibly long, lined with door after door. Each door bore a number, though the sequence was wrong, scattered, nonsensical. Some upside down, others repeated endlessly. But the hall was real, beckoning, her only way out. She stepped through the frame, her body slipping into the impossible corridor. The floorboards groaned beneath her, though her weight felt like nothing. Her bare feet left faint impressions in the dust, but when she glanced back, the prints were gone. Every door she passed whispered. Snatches of words, laughter, sobbing arguments that had taken place decades ago. She kept walking, ignoring them, focusing on the way the corridor seemed to curve forward endlessly, no end in sight. Then one door clicked. She froze. It was number 105. A door she remembered walking past on her first night. Her pulse quickened, throat tightening as the knob turned from the inside. The door creaked open, and the scent of cigarettes and cheap perfume spilled into the hallway. Inside, faint music played a scratchy record, spinning without a hand to change it, and someone stood there, a woman, her hair pinned in the style of the 1930s, her dress frayed at the hemskin, pale as parchment. She smiled at Nora, but her eyes glowed faintly, that same feverish light that had lived in the reflection. "Come in," the woman said, softly, voice almost kind. "You're expected." Nora's stomach lurched. The chant resumed quieter now, weaving through the walls of the corridor. She took a step back, but the floor tilted forward, urging her toward the open door. The woman's smile widened and her voice dipped into a whisper. "You're the new key. The one who holds it stays." Nora clenched her fists. "I'm not staying." The woman tilted her head, curious, almost pitying. "No one leaves, dear. Not really. The hotel is your skin now. You'll see." Nora slammed the door shut with all her strength. The woman's laughter bled through the wood, muffled and endless. She ran. The corridor bent and warped as she sprinted, doors slamming open around her hands, reaching through the gaps, blackened fingers, bone-white knuckles, hollow palms, all clawing for her arms, her hair, her clothes. She ducked and shoved, fighting them off her lungs, burning with each breath. And then ahead of her she saw it, a staircase. The first structure that looked solid, real, like it might lead somewhere other than the endless trap of rooms. She bolted for it, heart hammering, the chant pounding harder now. "Nora, stay. Nora, stay." She took the stairs 2 at a time, hands gripping the cold rail. The higher she climbed, the louder the whispers became, until they merged into a roar. At the top landing, one final door waited, plain, unmarked. She pressed her hand against it, and for the first time since the nightmare began, the wood felt warm, alive. With a trembling breath, Nora pushed it open. On the other side was the lobby of the Chelsea Hotel, but it was wrong. The chandelier hung shattered glass shards, suspended midair. The velvet couches dripped with something dark. The front desk was empty, its bell crushed flat. And lining the lobby walls were dozens of mirrors, each one showing her face, multiplied, distorted, smiling too wide. Her reflection hadn't been destroyed, it had multiplied, and every version of her turned to look at her at once. The lobby pressed in on her with unbearable weight. The mirrors glowed faintly in the dim light, lining every wall from floor to ceiling. Each pane showed Nora, yet not quite their skin. Paler, their smiles sharper, their eyes hollowed with that same sick luminescence. Dozens of versions of her stood silently within the glass, waiting, studying her with patient hunger. She took one step forward, and every reflection moved in unison, not mimicking, anticipating. They tilted their heads before she did, their mouths stretching into knowing grins, before hers even twitched. The air smelled faintly of ozone and mildew. The silence between the mirrors was alive, charged with static. She heard it in her bones. One of the reflections lifted its hand against the inside of the glass. Not in mimicry, but in invitation. Nora's throat tightened. These weren't mere reflections. They were the pieces of herself the hotel had stripped away, every moment of fear, despair, and weakness collected over time, distilled into a gallery of doppelgangers. One of them opened its mouth and all the others followed. "Nora," they whispered in unison. The sound was like 1,000 voices pressing against her eardrums, a chorus of her own tongue. "We've been waiting for you." She stumbled back, colliding with the ruined front desk. The bell, crushed and warped, emitted a faint tinny chime, as if mocking her. Her instincts screamed run, but where every path led past the mirrors, every surface reflected her, multiplied her. There was no way forward without passing them. The nearest reflection stepped closer, pressing its full body against the glass. A handprint smeared across the inside of the mirror, leaving behind a streak of black condensation. Its eyes flared, glowing with hungry heat. "You're not whole without us," it whispered. The other Noras spoke in layered voices. "You can't leave us here. We are you. We are what the Chelsea made of you." She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, grounding herself against the rising panic. "No," she muttered, voice hoarse. "You're not me. You're what it wants me to be." The mirrors trembled at her defiance. Cracks spiderwebbed across the nearest pane, not breaking, but twitching like veins alive beneath the surface. The reflected Nora's laughed a sound that wasn't hers, but came from her throat all the same. She scanned the lobby, desperate for escape. The chandelier still hung in the center, its jagged crystals suspended mid-air, frozen in some unnatural collapse. Above it yawned the vaulted ceiling, but beyond that, a shimmer, an opening. Her heart thudded painfully. If she could shatter enough glass, maybe she could rip open that wound in the hotel's skin. The reflections saw her gaze. Their smiles widened sharp as razors. "You can try one," hissed, "but you'll break before we do." The chant began again, a suffocating chorus rattling the walls, shaking the air. "Nora, stay. Nora, stay." Her hands found the only weapon left, the broken brass key still clutched tight. Its glow was faint, weak, but it pulsed against her palm as if it recognized her intent. Nora raised it, took one ragged breath, and hurled herself toward the nearest mirror. The impact was explosive. Glass shattered outward in a spray of shards slicing across her skin. The reflection within let out a piercing scream as its body split into fragments, dissolving into black smoke. The sound shook the lobby, making the other mirrors tremble violently. The reflections grew frantic, their voices clashing over one another now. "No, no, don't." Nora stumbled, bleeding, but forced herself forward. She swung the key again, smashing into the next mirror, then the next, each shattering, accompanied by a howl that rattled her bones. Every strike tore at her. The voices grew shriller, angrier, desperate. Shards cut deep into her arms, her face, her hands, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The ceiling above the chandelier began to split, that shimmer widening, glowing with a sickly white light. A fissure opening in the skin of the Chelsea itself. Nora let out a ragged scream and drove the key into the largest mirror on the far wall. It burst apart with a sound like thunder. The reflections wailed, collapsing into dust, their voices strangled in unison. The fissure above tore wider, a void of impossible light spilling into the lobby. The hotel roared. The floor buckled beneath her feet. Walls shook, vomiting plaster and brick. She fell to her knees, clutching the key. The last of the mirrors cracked the glass, raining down around her like jagged rain. And then silence. Nora looked up. The void above the chandelier was vast now, stretching beyond sight. She could feel it pulling, sucking the lobby toward it. The couches, the desk, the shattered mirrors all lifting, breaking apart, rising into that endless light. Her body too began to lift. For a moment she let herself believe she might be free. But just before she was pulled into the light, something cold and familiar closed around her ankle. A hand, pale, hollow, glowing faintly. Her reflection had survived. The grip tightened around her ankle, colder than stone, colder than death. Nora kicked her other foot, striking wildly shards of glass, cutting deeper into her skin as she thrashed. The pull was immense, as though the reflection's hand wasn't just flesh, but an anchor to the very bones of the Chelsea. The void above beckoned with its harsh, consuming light, dragging her upward, promising release, or perhaps only another cage. The hand below, spectral and unyielding, tugged her back down into the ruin of the lobby. Her body stretched between two hungers. She screamed, the sound raw and tearing from her throat, her voice lost beneath the thunder of collapsing walls and groaning beams. The reflection pulled harder. Out of the shattered glass nearest her, it rose a version of herself, pale, hollow-eyed, the smile now gone, replaced with a grim, hungry determination. This one didn't laugh. It didn't whisper. It only held her, dragging her inch by inch down into the rubble-strewn floor. Nora clawed at the air fingers, reaching for the light above. It shimmered, almost pulsed, as if urging her to fight. The key in her hand throbbed against her palm, brighter now, glowing with a furious heat that burned into her skin. The reflection hissed, eyes narrowing at the glow. It yanked harder, nearly dislocating her knee. With a strangled cry, Nora swung the key downward. The sharp brass teeth tore through the reflection's wrist like tearing cloth. A scream erupted louder than any before, rattling every remaining shard in the lobby. Black ichor spilled from the wound, dissolving into smoke before it touched the floor. The hand slackened. Nora kicked free, every muscle trembling, and the pull of the light above surged. Her body rose higher, glass and furniture spiraling past her into the void. The reflection wasn't finished. From every remaining mirror shard, dozens more hands clawed outward, grasping at her legs, her waist, her hair. Faces formed in the jagged glass, all her own, all shrieking in fury. "You are us!" They roared together, voices overlapping until they became a single, violent thunder. "You cannot leave what you are." The force of their hatred slammed into her chest like a wave. Her lungs seized. The light above flickered as though wavering against their power. Nora clutched the key tighter. Its glow expanded, burning bright enough to blind, searing the hands that reached for her. Their skin smoked, hissed, peeled away. But for every hand she shook off, two more formed. The hotel shook violently now. The chandelier wrenched free from its invisible suspension, spiraling upward into the void. The floors buckled as cracks ripped through them like spreading veins, and through it all the voice of the Chelsea itself groaned, ancient and endless stay. Nora's body burned from within her veins, carrying that same feverish light. She felt her heart stutter, and then pound in rhythm with the pulsing key. The choice wasn't hers anymore. Either let go and be torn back into the dark maw of the Chelsea, or surrender to the light and risk becoming nothing at all. Her vision blurred. She thought of the streets of New York, outside the sound of taxis, the rhythm of voices, the simple humanity she had once known. She thought of how she had entered the hotel, only searching for quiet, for a place to write, for a life she might piece back together. Now the Chelsea demanded all of it. She screamed one last time, lifting the key above her head. Its light erupted in a violent flare, a beacon that ripped across the lobby. The mirrors shattered in unison, their howls cut short as the hands withered into ash. The pull of the light became irresistible. Nora's body snapped upward, hurled into the void. For one dizzying instant, she felt herself unravel bones dissolving into light skin, peeling into dust, thoughts scattering like torn pages in the wind. And then silence. The hotel was gone. The mirrors were gone. The hands were gone. Nora floated in an expanse of pale, humming brightness. Warmth touched her skin, but it was no sun she knew. The void wasn't empty. It was filled with whispers. Not hostile now, but mournful. The voices of all who had come before her. Their words, a low, unending hymn. "You cannot leave," they said softly, not in anger but in resignation. "But you can change." Nora looked down. The key in her hand had melted into light. Its glow seeped into her veins, pulsing with her heartbeat. She was no longer entirely herself, no longer entirely human. The Chelsea hadn't let her go. It had remade her. The brightness thinned like fog peeling back at dawn. Nora's body, if she could still call it that, tumbled downward. When her feet struck solid ground, the shock rattled her to the marrow. Her knees buckled palms, scraping rough stone. She gasped, chest-heaving eyes adjusting. It was not the lobby. She stood in a long hallway, lined with peeling wallpaper. Crimson roses faded to the color of dried blood. Doors stretched on either side, wood, warped brass knobs, tarnished. They weren't ordinary hotel doors. Each one throbbed faintly, as though alive, the grain of the wood flexing in slow, shallow breaths. Behind them, something stirred. A muffled whisper seeped through, layered and indistinct like 1,000 conversations at once. Some sounded desperate pleading. Others laughed softly. One or two sobbed. Her stomach knotted. The Chelsea hadn't released her. It had drawn her deeper into some hidden spine of its body. She realized with a sickening twist the void hadn't been escape. It was a passage inward, Her skin still glowed faintly, threads of light pulsing beneath the surface like veins of fire. Every door seemed to respond, the whispers swelling louder as she passed. They knew her. They wanted her. Her hand brushed the nearest doorknob. The metal was warm. A surge of images hit her faces, screaming in shadow. A child's lullaby, cut short hands clawing from inside a locked room. She yanked her hand back, bile rising in her throat. The whisper behind that door shifted, addressing her directly. Nora, her name again. Always her name. She staggered back, pressing against the opposite wall. The hallway stretched endlessly, no visible end in sight. The air was thick, hard to breathe. Then faint footsteps. She froze. From down the hallway, something moved. At first, only a shadow against shadows flickering unnaturally beneath the dim light bulbs overhead. It elongated, then snapped shorter, as though walking wasn't its chosen shape, but an act of mimicry. As it drew closer, her glow revealed details. It was a man, or had once been. His suit was decades-old fabric, rotted and moth-eaten. His eyes were two pits of dim white fire. In his hand dangled a ring of brass keys, hundreds of them clinking with each step. The keeper. She felt it before she knew the word. This figure was bound to the Chelsea, a custodian of its endless halls. The keeper stopped several feet away, his head tilted with an insect-like twitch, the keys swaying. "You should not be here," he rasped. His voice was brittle parchment tearing in the wind. "You are not guest. Not anymore." Nora's throat dried. "Then what am I?" The keeper lifted one bony finger, pointing to her faintly glowing veins. A door, her blood iced. A door to what? He did not answer with words. Instead, he thrust one key into the nearest door and twisted. The door swung open, not to a room, but to a storm of black feathers and shrieking wind. A swarm poured out, not crows, not insects, but something in between. Their wings sliced the air with razor edges, their eyes glowing with the same faint fire as the keeper's. The hallway shrieked with their fury. Nora staggered back, clutching her arms to shield her face. The things circled, spiraling around her, their wings slicing shallow cuts into her skin. The keeper's voice rose above the din. "You will open the rest. Every door, every room, every forgotten soul." Her pulse hammered. She felt the glow inside her flare in resistance, the key light in her veins pushing back against the swarm. The creatures screamed as they neared her skin, recoiling from the glow. They circled again, but didn't land. Nora lowered her arms, slowly trembling, realization dawning. The keeper wanted to use her. The Chelsea had remade her into a living key, a vessel that could unlock what even he could not. The weight of it nearly drove her to her knees. Behind each door pulsed something alive, something imprisoned. And if she obeyed, she would set them free, unleashing every nightmare the Chelsea had devoured across its history. The keeper tilted his head again, the keys clinking like tiny bells. "Begin." Nora tightened her fists. Her veins glowed brighter, spilling light into the suffocating hall. She shook her head, defiance trembling but firm. "No." The keeper's empty eyes narrowed. The swarm shrieked louder, tightening their circle. Nora raised her glowing hand, the light swelling until it seared her skin. For the first time since she'd entered the Chelsea, she felt not powerless but dangerous. "If I'm a door," she whispered, voice breaking but strong, "then I choose what opens." The keeper's smile stretched like tearing cloth, and every door along the hallway began to thrum at once, their whispers rising into a deafening chorus. The hallway shook, as if caught in the throat of some enormous beast doors, rattling in unison, their whispers swelling, until the very wallpaper curled away from the walls. The keeper stood still, skeletal fingers wrapped around his key ring, his empty eyes locked on her glowing veins. Nora's defiance only seemed to amuse him. His smile cracked, wider, too wide, revealing no teeth, just a hollow darkness that seemed to extend forever. "You think choice is yours?" He rasped, voice echoing through the hallway. But every guest chooses the same. In time, the swarm pressed closer, their wings whispering against her skin, slicing shallow trails of blood that smoked as the light from her veins burned through the wounds. They shrieked, but did not relent. Nora clenched her fists tighter. The glow beneath her skin pulsed harder, each throb matching the pounding of her heart. The Chelsea had made her a door, yes, but that didn't mean she had to open toward the darkness. The keeper twisted another key and flung open a second door. A rush of air burst outward, bringing with it the reek of rot. Inside, Nora glimpsed a room filled wall to wall with cribs, each rocking on its own. The sound of hundreds of babies crying filled the hall, piercing, frantic, endless. No one inside tended them. No one soothed them. Just the sound of hunger, pain, abandonment echoing like a punishment that would never end. The swarm dove toward her, driving her back against the wall. The baby's cries merged with the shrieks filling her head until she thought her skull would split. "Open," the keeper commanded. "Let them out." Her hands shook violently. Her skin burned with light, and for a moment she nearly gave in, to ease their cries, to release them from that horror. But something inside her whispered, not the hotel's voice, not the keeper's, something quieter, her own instinct. That is not release. That is feeding it. She staggered sideways, clutching the wall. The cribs rocked harder, their cries reaching a fever pitch. The keeper stepped forward, keys clinking with each step. Nora pressed her palm against the nearest door, not to open, but to close. The light flared out of her veins, surging into the wood. The whispering behind it screamed a raw sound of rage and fear, and then the door slammed shut with a thunderous crack. The entire hallway went silent for an instant. The keeper froze, his empty eyes flickering with something she hadn't seen before. Not fury, not control, but shock. Nora's breath came hard, her lungs searing with each inhale. Her skin was alight now, her veins running with molten fire. "I don't open for you," she whispered, voice trembling. "I lock you out." The keeper's jaw unhinged, his scream erupting in a voice that wasn't his alone, but the layered cries of countless souls. The swarm broke apart in panic, their wings scattering black dust as they vanished into the cracks of the ceiling. Every door along the hallway rattled violently, wood splintering, brass knobs warping as though the things inside clawed desperately to be free. Nora pressed both hands against the walls, light spilling out of her body into the plaster, into the doors themselves. One by one, the whispers cut off. Some screamed until the last second. Others begged. A few laughed, their sound hollow, as they were silenced. The doors sealed shut. The hallway quaked, furious at her defiance, but they did not open. The keeper staggered back, keys falling from his skeletal grip, clattering to the floor with a metallic shriek. His empty sockets flickered with dim embers, flickering as though they were about to burn out. "You cannot," he rasped, voice breaking like shattered glass. Nora stepped forward, trembling but unbroken. Her glow dimmed and pulsed, strained but alive. "I already did." The hotel screamed. The entire hallway bent inward, walls, twisting ceiling, bowing as if collapsing into a singular throat. Nora was hurled forward, pulled into the collapse, dragged into darkness that spun like a whirlpool. And then silence again. She fell onto a carpeted floor, coughing violently, her body seared and weak. When she opened her eyes, she saw the familiar sight of the Chelsea's lobby, though it was fractured mirrors, cracked paintings, torn chandeliers, shattered across the ground. The hotel wasn't whole anymore. Her veins still glowed faintly but surely. She had burned a scar into the Chelsea itself, and it would never heal. But the keeper wasn't gone. Somewhere in the ruin, the faint clink of a single key echoed, and his whisper slithered through the cracks of the broken walls. "This is only one hall. There are hundreds more." The lobby around her breathed like a living lung plaster, walls expanding and contracting in shallow rhythms. Fragments of chandelier glass glittered on the carpet like frozen tears. The great desk that once anchored the room was cracked down the center, its wood warped and split, as though a great pressure had crushed it from the inside. Nora pushed herself upright, her hands trembling. Her veins still pulsed faintly, the glow weaker, but steady, like embers waiting for air. Each pulse lit the ruined lobby in brief flashes, shadows jerking away from her, as if they feared her presence. The echo of the keeper's words still crawled through her skull hundreds more. The Chelsea was no single corridor. It was an entire labyrinth of hidden halls and sealed chambers, each door holding a nightmare. The thought pressed against her chest like a stone. She had locked one hall, but the rest still whispered, still begged, still waited. A sound broke the silence, soft at first, almost gentle. A voice humming. Her head snapped toward the grand staircase. From the shadows at the top, a faint glow shimmered, not the harsh white of her veins, but a softer golden flicker, like candlelight. The humming grew clearer, the tune strangely familiar. Soothing and sorrowful, cautious, she climbed. Each step groaned beneath her weight, the railing slick with something dark that clung to her fingers. Her pulse quickened. She half expected the keeper to lunge from the shadows, his keys dragging her back into the endless hall. Instead, when she reached the landing, she saw her. A woman stood in the corridor, dressed in a tattered white gown that might once have been beautiful. Her hair spilled loose around her shoulders, long and dark, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of a candle clutched in her hand. She wasn't whole. Her edges blurred, shimmering faintly, as though she were both here and not. The woman turned her face pale but kind. She smiled at Nora, though it was tinged with sorrow. "You closed them," she whispered. "You actually closed them." Nora's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The woman stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the warped floorboards. "A guest," she said softly. "Long ago. I tried what you've done. I fought him, but I failed." Her voice caught trembling on the word failed. "The Chelsea devoured me before I could finish. It trapped me in its walls, bound me here with the others. But I held on to a piece of myself." Her glow brightened golden light spilling from her candle into the shadows. Nora realized it wasn't just a candle. It was her will, hardened into flame. The woman's eyes softened, studying the light in Nora's veins. "You are stronger than I was. The hotel reshaped you, but it didn't consume you. That makes you dangerous to him." Nora glanced back at the lobby below the ruins of what she had defied. "He said there are hundreds more halls. I can't..." Her voice cracked. "I can't do this alone." The woman reached out her hand, hovering just above Nora's shoulder. Though she couldn't touch, Nora felt the warmth radiating from her. "You aren't alone. Not anymore. Every soul he's bound, every guest he's broken, they linger. They hate him. They wait for someone who can lead." The candlelight flared, stretching outward, revealing a mural painted across the cracked walls of the corridor scenes of the Chelsea through the ages. Guests in fine suits and gowns, artists painting feverishly, musicians bent over pianos. But woven through it all were shadows, grotesque figures watching from corners, whispering in ears, pulling strings unseen. Nora's stomach turned. "It's always been feeding." The woman nodded. "Art, genius, madness, tragedy. He doesn't care which so long as it leaves behind pain. That's the Chelsea's sustenance. That is why the doors never stop whispering." Her voice lowered grave. "And that is why you must never open them." Nora felt her glow pulse again, the veins of light stirring with her heartbeat. She clenched her fists. "Then I'll close them. All of them." The woman's smile was sad, but proud. That is what I once vowed, but I lacked the strength. She lifted the candle between them, flame dancing brighter. Take it, a piece of me, a fragment of every guest who resisted him. It will guide you where he cannot follow. Nora hesitated, then reached out. The candle flame leapt into her palm, sinking into her veins. A surge of warmth filled her chest. The light in her blood blazed brighter, now streaked with gold. For a moment, the Chelsea itself seemed to recoil, the walls groaning in protest. The woman dimmed her form, flickering. Remember, he will twist every trick, every memory. He will make you doubt. But the light is yours. Use it. Her voice faded with her form until only her echo remained. The corridor fell silent. But the air was different, charged heavier, as though the Chelsea itself had noticed the exchange. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door slammed open on its own. The sound rang down the hall, sharp and violent. Nora's veins glowed fiercely, the gold light steadying her shaking hands. The keeper knew she had help now, and he would not forgive it. The echo of the slamming door rippled through the Chelsea like a shockwave, rattling chandeliers and sending hairline cracks crawling across the walls. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, and for a fleeting instant, Nora thought the entire building might collapse around her. But the Chelsea never broke. It endured. It was eternal. Her veins pulsed with golden light, now steady and warm. But the sound of that door opening pulled her forward against her will. She could almost feel it tugging at her chest, like an invisible thread, drawing her deeper into the labyrinth. The hallways shifted as she walked. The carpet beneath her shoes changed color with each step, crimson, then midnight blue, then patterned with symbols that made her vision blur if she looked too long. The wallpaper seemed to breathe, faces pressing through from behind their lips, moving in soundless pleas. She reached the end of the corridor. The door stood ajar, black void spilling from within, like a cloud of smoke that didn't dissipate. The brass knob gleamed faintly in her light, but the wood was cracked and wet, as though something inside pressed relentlessly against it, straining to get out. Her hand trembled as she pushed it open. Inside was not a room. It was a theater. Rows upon rows of velvet seats stretched into the darkness, though some were torn open, stuffing spilling like entrails. The air smelled of mildew and scorched wood. The stage loomed at the far end, draped in tattered curtains that shifted, even though there was no breeze. As Nora stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her. Her light dimmed, smothered by the suffocating dark. And then the curtain rose. A figure stepped onto the stage. It was herself, or rather, a version of her skin, pale veins darkened like black ink eyes, hollow pits. She moved with jerky, puppet-like motions, yet her voice, when it came, was soft, melodic, enchanting. "Welcome," the double said, spreading her arms wide. "Tonight's performance is for you." The audience stirred. Nora's breath caught as she realized the seats were filled. Every chair was occupied by a body, some rotted, some skeletal, some still fresh. All of them sat upright, heads turned toward the stage, empty eyes locked on her. The double stepped closer, each footfall echoing far too loudly across the boards. "Do you know what this place is?" she whispered. "Every failed guest performs here again and again. Their last act repeated until the walls remember every scream, every sob, every note." Nora's pulse hammered in her throat. The corpses in the audience shifted a ripple of motion like a wave, and then they began to clap, slow, deliberate, synchronized. The sound filled the theater, drowning her heartbeat. The double smiled, teeth too sharp. "You'll join them soon." Light surged in Nora's veins, gold flaring against the suffocating black. She lifted her hand, ready to strike, but the double mirrored her, instantly raising her own glowing hand, black light bleeding from beneath her skin. Every movement Nora made, the other copied. Each stance, each gesture perfectly reflected but corrupted. The keeper's voice slithered through the dark, echoing around her. "You can close doors, Nora, but can you close yourself?" Her double lunged. The air split with the force of it, the clash of golden and black light exploding into the theater. The dead audience rose from their seats, moving in unison, clapping faster, harder, their jaws stretching open in silent screams. Nora staggered under the weight of the mirror's strike. She felt her own strength reflected back at her, as if the Chelsea had torn the light from her veins and twisted it into something unrecognizable. But beneath the roar of clapping, beneath the keeper's taunts, she remembered the woman's voice, soft and steady. "The light is yours. Use it." Her glow steadied. Not a weapon, not just force. It was will. It was choice. She lowered her hand. The double faltered, its black veins flickering uncertainly. The audience froze. Nora whispered, voice shaking but resolute, "You're not me. You're him." The light in her veins erupted outward, golden fire rushing across the theater. The corpses shrieked as their hollow bodies dissolved into smoke. The double screamed, its face warping, cracking, shattering into shards of shadow. The stage split in two, collapsing into the void beneath. Nora dropped to her knees, gasping for air as the golden glow receded. The theater dissolved around her seats, melting into ash curtains, curling into smoke. The only thing left was the echo of applause, fading, resentful dying. When she lifted her head, she was no longer in the theater. She was standing in a stairwell, iron railings, twisted steps leading both up and down into pitch black, and from below came the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The keeper was coming closer. The footsteps reverberated through the stairwell, each one dragging against metal, a weight far heavier than a man should carry. The air thickened with every sound, pressing cold against Nora's chest, forcing her breath shallow. She gripped the railing, her veins glowing faintly with gold, but the light flickered as though reluctant to answer her call. The keeper was close now, closer than he had ever been. Not a whisper, not a shadow at the edge of her vision. He was here. Her mind screamed at her to run. Upward, anywhere but down. The iron steps trembled beneath her feet as she climbed, each motion desperate, every breath a gasp. The stairwell twisted as she ascended. Steps bent at angles that defied reason. Railings ended abruptly, replaced by jagged stone. The air smelled of burnt paper and rust, and behind her the footsteps followed steady, patient, unhurried. She rounded one last corner and stumbled onto a landing. Her breath caught. This floor didn't exist. It stretched in both directions, lined with heavy wooden doors, but unlike the rest of the Chelsea, these were uniform, smooth, pale oak with black iron hinges. No numbers, no plaques, no names, just blank waiting doors. The carpet was gray damp beneath her feet, and the air was colder than ice. She knew instinctively this was not a guest floor. This was something hidden, something the Chelsea had concealed from even its most faithful occupants. And then the air split. From the stairwell below, the keeper emerged. He was taller than she remembered, his head nearly brushing the ceiling, shoulders impossibly broad. His coat dragged behind him a train of shadows, whispering as though stitched from screams. His face remained obscured beneath the brim of his hat, but the glint of his keys, dozens, maybe hundreds, caught what little light her veins still gave. The keys clinked as he stepped forward. Each sound cut into her bones. "You wander far," he said, voice thick as tar. This floor was never yours to see. Nora's veins blazed gold in response, but her knees shook under the weight of his presence. "Then why show me?" she whispered. The keeper tilted his head, almost curious. "Because the Chelsea is alive, and it wants you to understand. These doors," he gestured, his keyring shifting, "are not for guests. They are for me, for the truths I keep locked away." The air hummed deep and low. Nora felt it in her teeth, her chest. The doors began to shake, iron hinges rattling. Something behind them pounded once, twice, eager. Her glow brightened against the pole, steadying her. "Then I'll close them too." The keeper laughed. It was not a sound, it was a collapse, a ruin, a landslide of grief. The shadows around him thickened, claws stretching toward her. "Try," he hissed, "and you will see what lives inside the locked heart of the Chelsea." One of the doors burst open. Wind rushed through the hall, freezing, carrying the stench of stagnant water. From the darkness beyond the threshold crawled a figure, long-limbed, dripping skin, bloated and pale. Its mouth gaped open, seawater pouring onto the carpet. Dozens of more shapes shifted behind it, hands grasping, eyes glinting. The keeper stepped aside, his silhouette filling the hall. "These are mine. My collection. Every drowned soul, every swallowed dream. Each one kept here, waiting." The bloated figure dragged itself forward, nails tearing furrows into the carpet. Its hollow eyes fixed on Nora. Her blood flared with gold. She lifted her hands, light streaming outward, pressing against the tide of water and rot. The figure recoiled, but behind it, more pressed forward, hundreds surging through the open door. The stairwell behind her trembled, shaking loose bolts. If she stayed, she would be swallowed. But one truth blazed in her mind: the doors here weren't like the others. They weren't traps for guests. They were prisons for horrors that belonged to the keeper. And if she could close even one, she would wound him. The shadows surged toward her. The keeper raised his ring of keys, the sound drowning the hall in metallic thunder. Nora planted her feet. The golden light erupted from her chest, spreading like a fire through her veins. She reached toward the gaping doorway, toward the tide of drowned souls clawing for her, and she pulled. The door screamed as though alive, slamming shut with a force that shook the entire hidden floor. The shadows recoiled. The water vanished. The corpses dissolved like smoke. The keeper staggered back a step. For the first time he seemed shaken. Nora's chest heaved. Her glow dimmed, almost spent. But she had seen it. The keeper could be hurt. He lowered his head, brim shadowing his face. When he spoke, his voice was a storm barely contained. "You have made a mistake." The other doors shuddered, every hinge groaning in unison. The entire floor was about to wake. The hallway trembled. Every door along the hidden floor quivered in its frame, iron hinges straining wood, splintering. Nora's chest pounded in rhythm with the thunderous groans, as if the Chelsea itself was holding its breath before an eruption. The keeper stood in the center of it all, his keys clashing like church bells rung for the dead. Shadows licked the walls, curling across the damp carpet, hungry. Then the doors burst open. One after another, all down the corridor, they blew wide, crashing against the walls. Darkness poured from within each room, thick and rolling like tar smoke, carrying with it the scent of rot mildew, and something far older like the earth of freshly opened graves. From the first doorway, a woman stepped out. Her body folded at grotesque angles, every joint bent backward. Her eyes were stitched shut with black thread, and when she opened her mouth, the sound was not a scream, but the dry rasp of dozens of voices whispering at once. From the second doorway came a child or something that had once been a child. Its skin was parchment thin, stretched taut over tiny bones, and its head lolled as though broken at the neck. It dragged behind it a toy wagon, the wheels squeaking, filled not with playthings, but with small severed hands. More spilled out. A man whose jaw unhinged until it scraped the ground, teeth cascading like broken glass. A cluster of faceless figures, their heads smooth and featureless, yet every one of them breathing in Nora's direction with greedy, wet gasps. The floor heaved under their weight. The keeper raised his head, and for the first time, Nora caught a glimpse beneath the brim of his hat. Not a face, just a hollow void swirling with shadows where a face should have been. The sound of his voice rumbled out of it like a collapsing building. "These are the songs you've silenced," he said. the cries I keep contained. You think you can close me, little light, then drown in what I hold. The creature surged forward. Nora's light flared, but it sputtered at the edges as if the sheer tide of horrors pressed it thin. She backed against the stairwell railing, her chest burning, lungs tight. One of the faceless reached her first, its smooth head bending low, pressing close as if trying to inhale her glow. She shoved out her palm, and the golden fire surged, incinerating it into smoke. Another leapt in its place. She struck again, light burning, but the effort drained her. Every time one dissolved, another pressed forward from the endless stream spilling through the doors. The keeper laughed, a soundless, suffocating ripple in the air. Then the Chelsea itself shifted. The floor beneath her feet twisted, the hallway lengthening, pulling her backward. Doors continued to open ahead of her, more and more, stretching into infinity. She wasn't being trapped. She was being guided. Her veins pulsed violently, urging her forward even as terror froze her limbs. And she realized it. The Chelsea was not just unleashing nightmares to destroy her. It was steering her towards something. She pushed through the swarm light, blazing against claw and fang and rotting breath. She felt the walls narrowing, forcing her down the hall, the shadows pressing behind her. Finally, the door stopped. At the very end of the impossible hallway stood one door unlike the others. It was vast, towering black iron from top to bottom. No handle, no lock, no keyhole, just a slab of metal, etched with shifting patterns glowing faintly red, as though alive with heat. The sound behind it was not whispering, not moaning. It was pulsing, a heartbeat, the heartbeat of the Chelsea. Nora staggered toward it, her veins thrumming in resonance. The closer she drew, the stronger the rhythm became, rattling her bones. The horrors behind her stopped suddenly, as if commanded. They lingered, watching, but did not cross the final stretch of carpet. Even the keeper did not move closer. He remained in shadow, head tilted. "Now you see," he said softly, almost reverent. "The heart of the Chelsea, the first door, the last door, all others are born from it. To close it is to end me, but to open it." He let the words hang heavy as iron. Nora pressed her glowing hand to the metal. It was searing, almost unbearable, yet her light did not falter. The patterns writhed under her palm, rearranging, pulsing with the rhythm of the heartbeat. She felt it. This was the source. The keeper's power. The endless hunger of the Chelsea itself. If she could close it, the building might finally sleep. But to do so, she would have to risk opening it first. The heartbeat thundered, shaking the hidden floor. Her chest ached in time, with its golden light racing through her veins, faster, brighter, hotter. Behind her, the keeper whispered voice sinking into her ears like oil. "Choose carefully. A wrong touch, and you will not silence the Chelsea. You will become it." Nora pressed her palm harder against the iron door, her breath ragged. The heat was unbearable, searing through her skin, as though the Chelsea itself meant to fuse her hand into the living metal. The pulsing rhythm beneath her palm throbbed in unison with her heartbeat, pulling her deeper, whispering temptation into her bones. "Open me," it seemed to murmur. "See what you truly are." Her veins flared gold, a desperate shield against the pull. Every instinct screamed that if she gave in, if she so much as let the door crack open, she would not return. She would be absorbed, swallowed whole, into the endless dream of the Chelsea. But the keeper was moving now. Slow, deliberate steps echoed down the hall. He did not rush. He didn't need to. The shadows parted for him as he advanced, his keys clattering softly in rhythm with the building's heartbeat. "You cannot shut it," he said, his tone low, confident. "This door was here before you, before me, before stone was laid in this city. It is not meant to close." Nora's teeth clenched. Her hand trembled against the iron, the patterns writhing beneath her palm like living veins. "Everything that opens," she whispered, "can be shut." The keeper tilted his head, and though his face was nothing but void, she felt his smile. "Then try little light. But if you falter, if you hesitate, It will claim you. And I will watch. The air thickened. Behind her, the creatures that had poured from the other doors pressed forward again, forming a silent, heaving crowd. Their stitched mouths, hollow eyes, broken limbs, all of them waiting eager. But they did not cross the invisible line before the great iron door. They stood as witnesses. The Chelsea wanted her choice. Nora dug her heels into the carpet, closed her eyes, and let the golden current surge through her veins. She pulled not just from herself, but from every flicker of light she had felt in the walls in the rooms and the restless whispers of those who had once lived here. Their grief, their longing, their will to be free. Her glow intensified, blazing brighter than ever, spilling across the floor. The heartbeat behind the door faltered, stumbling in its rhythm. The red patterns squirmed violently, resisting her. The keeper hissed shadows tightening around him like armor. Do not touch what is not yours. But Nora did not move her hand. She poured everything she had into the door, forcing her light into the seams, into the shifting veins of iron. The Chelsea groaned. The hallway shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The door shuddered. For a moment it cracked, not outward, not to open, but inward. The heartbeat screamed a sound that was not sound but a tearing inside her skull, and she saw, not with her eyes but with her blood. Images seared through her mind, a room that stretched into infinity, lined with mirrors that reflected nothing, a spiral staircase descending into black water that never ended. A child's voice humming a lullaby in reverse. An ocean of faces pressed against glass, screaming silently, as if waiting to be let out. And at the center of it all, bound in chains of rust and shadow, was something vast. Its outline shifted, sometimes human, sometimes beast, sometimes building. Eyes burned like dying stars across its form. Its mouth opened not in hunger, but in mourning. The Chelsea was alive. Not just a building, not just a collection of ghosts, but a singular imprisoned being. The keeper was its jailer, and now she had touched its heart. The visions vanished as the door slammed back against her hand. Nora stumbled, nearly falling, but her glow remained. The heartbeat was ragged now, unsteady, weakened by her defiance. The keeper's calm broke. His voice rolled through the hall, no longer smooth, but raw, furious. You dare wound it. His shadows lashed outward, slamming against her light. The hallway convulsed, doors splintering, the carpet tearing, as if the building itself writhed in agony. The creatures shrieked, their silence broken into a single chorus of rage. Nora fell to her knees, hands burning, chest heaving. But she had seen the truth. The Chelsea was not just haunted, it was imprisoned. And if she could shut its heart completely, she might end both its torment and the keeper's reign. The keeper advanced, shadows boiling, his keys raised like a blade. Then you will drown with it. The hallway became a storm. The keeper's shadows lashed out like waves crashing against Nora's light. Every blow rattled her bones. Every strike threatened to smother the glow that pulsed through her veins. The walls shook violently, portraits tearing themselves free. Glass shattering across the carpet like scattered stars. Nora forced herself upright, her body trembling, but her light flaring brighter. She raised her hands and the golden current surged outward, forming a halo that scorched through the shadows. Each time his darkness met her radiance, the air cracked with a sound like splitting stone. The keeper moved closer, step by deliberate step keys clattering as he lifted his hand. From the void beneath his brim, a roar erupted, not human, not beast, but something that rattled the marrow in her bones. The creatures behind him pressed tighter, their stitched mouths breaking open, releasing gaping wails that curdled the air. Nora staggered, the cacophony tearing at her mind, but she would not yield. Enough! She screamed, her voice carried by the light as though amplified through every corner of the Chelsea. The glow surged, radiating outward until it lit the entire corridor like dawn breaking over a ruined battlefield. For a fleeting instant, the stitched woman dissolved into ash. The broken child evaporated into smoke, the faceless figures burned away into nothing. The hall itself seemed to recoil, its seams splitting. The keeper shielded himself with a wall of shadow, the void of his face twisting, shifting shapes, sometimes a skull, sometimes a mask of mirrors, sometimes pure emptiness. He raised his keys high, and with a clang that rang like the tolling of 1,000 bells, he struck them against the iron door. The entire floor convulsed. The black veins across the iron heart flared red, the heartbeat doubling, pounding, shaking the walls so violently that chunks of ceiling rained down. The keeper's laughter boomed, layered with countless voices. "Do you see light? You cannot close what I have bound. This heart belongs to me." But Nora's golden current pulsed faster, hotter, refusing to fade. She stepped forward, her feet sinking slightly into the trembling carpet, her eyes locked on the keeper. "No!" she whispered, though her voice carried through the air like thunder. "It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to them, to everyone you've trapped." And then it happened. All around her, whispers began to rise. Not of rage, not of hunger, but of release. The lingering voices of the Chelsea's lost inhabitants stirred, gathering around her like sparks feeding her glow. She felt them pour into her artists who had vanished in rooms, lovers who never left, wanderers who went silent within the walls. Their pain fueled her. Their longing steadied her hands. She raised both palms and pressed them flat against the burning iron door. The keeper lunged, shadows surging, keys lifted like a weapon to strike her down. And the Chelsea made its choice. The door did not open. It pulled. The iron yawned inward like a lung-drawing breath, and both Nora and the keeper were wrenched toward it. Shadows screamed. Light blazed as the great heart dragged them into its abyss. The hallway collapsed behind them, rooms dissolving into smoke, creatures scattering into dust. Nora's scream was swallowed by the void as the door slammed shut, and then silence. Nora's eyes opened to darkness, not the suffocating void of the keeper's face, but a cavernous chamber lined with shifting iron walls. The heartbeat was louder here, deafening pounding from every direction. The floor beneath her feet rippled like molten metal, and across the chamber the keeper rose. His form no longer solid. He flickered, half shadow, half man, unraveling, yet his keys still clung to his hand. "This is the heart," he said, voice fractured, almost breaking. "And now you're inside it. You cannot escape. Not without surrendering everything." Nora stood, golden light trembling across her skin, brighter than ever, but fragile at the edges. She felt it too, the chamber pressing inward, the heartbeat entwining with her own. She had become part of the Chelsea bound within its deepest prison, but she also felt something else. The chains, rusty, massive chains hung in the chamber, binding the pulsing core that rose in the center like a colossal shifting mass of flesh and stone. It was alive, writhing faintly, eyes blinking across its surface, mouths silently moving in grief. The Chelsea itself. It looked at her not with eyes, but with the terrible weight of something that had been trapped for too long. And Nora understood to end this, she had to break the chains. But the keeper moved closer. His keys, glowing shadows, swelling again. "Touch them," he warned, his voice both furious and pleading, "and you will destroy everything." The chains rattled with a low metallic groan, vibrating in rhythm with the heartbeat that shook the chamber. Their links were enormous, blackened, rusted iron, slick with something darker, as if they had been forged from blood itself. They coiled around the mass at the center, biting into its living surface, holding the Chelsea's true form prisoner. Nora's light flickered wildly as she gazed at it. The core writhed, its countless eyes blinking open and shut in waves, its silent mouths forming shapes that carried no sound, yet filled her mind with sorrow. She felt the raw weight of centuries in its despair. The keeper stepped closer, his shape fraying his shadows, thin yet still potent. He raised his keys, their teeth dripping with spectral light. "You don't understand," he hissed, though his voice cracked now as if stretched thin. "If you break those chains, the Chelsea will not free you. It will unmake everything around it. The lives, the streets, the city, all will drown in what it has been forced to carry. You will not save. You will destroy." Nora's breath hitched. His words slithered into her sowing doubt. She felt the heartbeat inside her veins, now stronger, sinking to hers. The Chelsea wanted release, but what kind of release? Her glow dimmed, flickering against the suffocating heat of the chamber. For a brief instant, she saw herself give in. Her light extinguished, her body crumpled, another lost soul, shackled into the hotel's endless hunger. But then the whispers returned. They filled her ears, soft as wind through leaves. Voices of the trapped, the painter who had vanished into his canvas, the singer who had drowned in her own song, the countless wanderers who had checked in but never left. "End it. Break it, please." Nora's golden current flared again, steadying her hands. She looked directly at the keeper, her voice sharp despite the tremor in her chest. "You didn't bind it to save anyone. You bound it to keep feeding on them. To keep feeding on us." The keeper's hollow face twisted, shadows convulsing. "And what will you be without me, girl? Without me, there is only the flood." "Then let the flood come," Nora whispered, stepping toward the first chain. The keeper lunged, his shadows shrieking like a storm, his keys raised high. Nora thrust out her hand, light blasting outward in a wave that struck him mid-charge. His form splintered, unraveling into fragments of shadow that screamed as they were flung back. She slammed her palms against the first chain. Her light poured into the iron, searing through it. The rust hissed, the metal howled, glowing red-hot as it split. With a deafening crack, the first link shattered fragments, scattering into the abyss. The chamber shook violently. The heartbeat staggered. The Chelsea's mass shuddered, countless eyes snapping open at once, all locking on her. Its silent scream shook her ribs. The keeper howled, reforming out of the shadows, but thinner now, his body unraveling faster. "Stop, you cannot hold it." But Nora was already at the second chain. Her glow dimmed as she poured herself into it, the current in her blood scorching her from within. Her hands burned, her skin blistered, but she did not falter. The second chain cracked, split, and exploded outward into sparks. The chamber roared like a collapsing cathedral. The iron mass strained the remaining chains, rattling furiously, desperate to hold on. The keeper dropped to his knees, shadows flaring weakly around him, his voice breaking into a sob. "Do you think it will thank you? Do you think it will love you for this?" Nora's body shook, sweat and blood mixing her glow, flickering dangerously low. She turned her head toward him, and though her face was pale and broken, her eyes still burned with golden fire. "I'm not doing it for love." She staggered to the third chain, her knees nearly buckling. Her palms pressed to the iron, and with the last of her strength, she let her light surge outward in one final burst. The chain snapped, and the Chelsea screamed. The sound was not a sound at all, but a tidal wave of grief, rage, and release. The chamber convulsed, the walls buckling, the floor splitting apart. The heartbeat collapsed into chaos, then surged so violently it rattled the marrow of her bones. The keeper disintegrated in an instant, his scream echoing into nothingness. The keys fell clattering to the ground and dissolved into dust. The last chain tore itself apart, not by Nora's touch, but by the sheer force of the Chelsea straining free. The prison collapsed. The living mass burst outward in a flood of light and shadow eyes and mouths dissolving into pure radiance. The chamber ripped itself open, and the force flung Nora upward into the void. For one breathless instant, she was weightless, suspended in golden light. She felt everything the sorrow of centuries, the songs that were never finished, the paintings that were never seen, the loves that were lost inside these walls, and then silence. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying in the lobby of the Chelsea Hotel. The chandeliers above glimmered faintly. The walls were cracked smoking, but whole. The iron door was gone. The corridors were still, and the heartbeat was gone. The hotel was quiet, truly quiet. The silence was unbearable. Nora lay on the cracked tiles of the Chelsea's lobby, her chest heaving, the faint traces of golden light still flickering across her skin like the dying glow of embers. For the first time since she had stepped through its doors, the hotel was utterly still. No whisper, no heartbeat, just the hollow hush of absence. She pushed herself upright. The great chandelier above hung crooked dust drifting down in small spirals, but it did not rattle. The lobby's once breathing walls were now just plaster and wood-scarred and broken, but still. And then they appeared. The air shimmered with a soft radiance, not unlike her own fading glow. Shadows shifted along the staircase, but these were not the keepers. They were delicate, fragile silhouettes, peeling away from the very fabric of the Chelsea. The first was a woman, her gown ragged with a century's wear, her face pale but serene. She gazed at Nora with a small, grateful smile, before dissolving into light that drifted upward, vanishing into nothing. Then came a man with paint-stained fingers, his eyes hollow with exhaustion, clutching a canvas that was no longer there. He nodded once, lips trembling as though trying to thank her, and he too dissolved. One after another, they emerged. The countless lost. The singer clutching her throat as if she could finally breathe again. The child with eyes wide, not with hunger this time, but relief. The faceless figures with stitched mouths now breaking free into sighs of release. They circled Nora, glowing softly, their silence no longer oppressive, but tender. The lobby filled with a light that was not hers, but theirs, a tide of release surging upward, as if the very bones of the Chelsea were exhaling. Nora wept. Tears cut down her dust-streaked cheeks, her body trembling with exhaustion, yet she stayed upright, watching, as each soul lifted, shimmered, and vanished. With every departure, the weight of centuries seemed to peel away from the hotel's skin. The walls began to crumble. It started gently, as though the building were sighing into rest. Wallpaper peeled, plaster cracked, wood groaned. The chandelier, its crystals dulled by time, shattered and fell scattering across the floor in a rain of muted glass. The Chelsea was collapsing not in rage, but in peace. Each beam that split, each window that cracked, was like the closing of a book that had been read too many times. Nora staggered toward the door. The ground shook beneath her, dust filling the air, but she did not run. She moved with quiet steadiness, her hands brushing the walls as though to say goodbye. Behind her, more souls rose, slipping free of the breaking hotel, vanishing into a horizon she could not see. Their light guided her steps. She reached the front doors just as the lobby caved in behind her. The great staircase folded inward, the ceiling collapsing in a rain of beams and stone. The roar was deafening, but the light softened it, carrying it like a lullaby. Nora stepped out onto 23rd Street. The night air was cold, sharp against her lungs. She stumbled onto the sidewalk, turning back just in time to see the Chelsea's towers crumbling inward, the brickwork folding like paper. Dust rose in waves, swallowing the street, and then a sudden, blinding pulse of golden light erupted upward, stretching into the sky like dawn. When it cleared, the hotel was gone. All that remained was an empty lot, cracked and smoking, silent as the grave. The heartbeat was gone. The whispering corridors were gone. The keeper was gone. but so too were the lost. Every soul had been released, their stories unbound from the cursed walls. Nora fell to her knees on the cold pavement, her glow finally extinguishing, leaving only the faint tremor of exhaustion in her bones. She stared at the hollow lot, her heart both heavy and unburdened. The Chelsea was no more, and for the first time, the city's night seemed honest. The hum of cars in the distance, the buzz of street lamps, the murmur of a breeze, real, ordinary sounds, untouched by the weight of the supernatural. Nora pressed her palms to the sidewalk, grounding herself, whispering to the empty lot, "Rest." The word vanished into the night, and she let the silence carry her into stillness. But deep in her bones, she felt it. This was not an ending. The keeper's warning echoed faintly in her memory. If you break the chains, you will not save. You will destroy. Had she freed them, or unleashed something else entirely? The lot pulsed once. Just once. A faint tremor under the pavement, almost like a heartbeat, and then it was gone. Nora stayed kneeling on the sidewalk long after the dust had settled, the faint hum of the city slowly creeping back into her awareness. Horns honked distantly. Footsteps clicked against the concrete, life moving forward as though the collapse of the Chelsea had never been. Yet she knew. She had felt it inside her bones, the way the structure exhaled its last breath, how the trapped voices had slipped into quiet release. Her body was trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Every muscle ached, every thought hung heavy. She dragged herself up her knees, weak, and pressed her back against a street lamp. Its glow buzzed faintly, sharp and ordinary. After so many nights immersed in the surreal breath of the Chelsea, even the simple imperfection of the lamp's flicker felt grounding, like a tether to the real world. Across the street, people had gathered, drawn by the crash and rumble, yet none of them seemed to truly see. They stared at the empty lot with confusion, their conversations low, skeptical. A hotel had stood there for more than a century. They rubbed their eyes as if memory itself was unspooling. It was as though the Chelsea had dissolved not only from stone, but from the collective recognition of the city. Nora did not try to explain. She simply turned away. She walked down 23rd Street, her steps slow but steady, as if each pace carried her further from a nightmare. The night air was sharp with the tang of dust, but the deeper she walked into Manhattan, the more it faded into the ordinary sense of the city. Exhaust roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart, the faint trace of rain on concrete. It was over. Yet the words the keeper had spoken clung to her thoughts, weaving themselves into her exhaustion. Not release, destruction. The ambiguity gnawed at her. What had she undone? What had she freed? She pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her own steady heartbeat. For now, it was only silence that answered her. A light drizzle began to fall. She tilted her head upward, letting the cool drops wash streaks of dust from her face. For the first time since she had entered the hotel, she allowed her body to truly relax each step, loosening as though she could finally surrender to rest. And then she saw it. In the rain-slick glass of a passing window, her reflection lingered too long. Her face, pale and streaked with tears, stared back at her. But behind her own reflection, faint and flickering, she saw another. A shadow. A figure that seemed to hover just beyond recognition, its edges blurred by the rain. She blinked and it was gone. The drizzle thickened into a curtain of rain, washing the street clean, obscuring the lot behind her, where the Chelsea once stood. She tightened her coat around her shoulders and pressed forward into the storm, her body aching, her mind caught between relief and unease. The city swallowed her. Neon lights shimmered across wet asphalt taxis, hissed through puddles, and the murmur of New York returned to its restless heartbeat. Yet, somewhere faint and immeasurable, a different heartbeat seemed to echo, not from within her, not from the ground beneath her, but from beyond. A whisper of rhythm that did not belong to her. She did not look back. Nora vanished into the city's tide, her figure dissolving into the crowd, leaving only the rain, the night, and the unsteady question lingering in the air. The Chelsea was gone, but absence too can be haunted. And now, as the rain falls quietly over the streets of New York and the last echoes of the Chelsea fade into silence, let your own thoughts soften. Imagine the city at rest, the lights dimming one by one, leaving behind only the steady hum of night. The story lingers its shadows curling at the edges, but you are safe here, away from the hotel's crumbling walls, away from the whispers that once pressed against its corridors. Take a slow breath in and let it ease out. Feel the weight of your body anchored and calm, unlike the restless spirits who searched so long for release. They are at peace now. You are at peace now. Whatever uncertainties linger, they belong to another place, another time. Here you have only the gentle rhythm of your breath, the softness of your bed, the quiet of your own safe space. If your mind still wanders back to that old hotel picture, it dissolving like mist at dawn, brick by brick, shadow by shadow, until there is only a clear horizon. Nothing reaching for you, nothing holding on. Just release. The night is long, but it is kind. Let it carry you the way the rain carries the city into its dreaming hours. Let it hush the noise of the day, soothe the restless corners of your mind, and draw you deeper into stillness. Close your eyes, surrender to the quiet, and drift gentle, untroubled into sleep.